That sandstorm sure did a number on El Amir. Not only is the power grid down, but that's a lot of sand in places you don't want it. Still, the damage may be even worse than that. So, there are two places I'd like you to swing by and check out. The concrete plant and the repair shop. We really need equipment from the shop and concrete from the plant for a bridge across the river. After all, we're not getting any shipments until we reach the other side.
Many spaces on the internet where I could use this as a hook and tease, but I think the rest is science is one because Michael, later on I'm going to be showing you the coolest thermal insulator. There's not many spaces on the internet where I could use this as a hook and tease, but I think the rest is science is one because Michael, later on I'm going to be showing you the coolest thermal insulator that I own. Okay.
The coolest, like does it skateboard and wear sunglasses and? I'm trying to think of another cool thing. I don't know.
Neither of us know cool things, let's be honest.
Does it have ripped jeans and a bad attitude?
Hey, maybe. You'll just have to tune in to find out. Or tune in, stay tuned, I guess.
All right. Well, look, our first discovery doesn't even come from Hannah or me. It comes from you.
It certainly does, because Anna has sent us in a question. This one's for you, Michael. What's one landmark experiment you wish you'd been at?
Oh, okay. I thought of a lot of experiments when I heard this question. I think that ultimately there are a lot of results I would have loved to have witnessed, but I'm going to have to say I would like to have been present at the Little Albert experiments.
Ooh, these are some of the most controversial experiments in the history of science.
Exactly. And I wouldn't have wanted to be there to be a part of it or to watch it happen. I would have just gone there to stop it. This episode is brought to you by Cancer Research UK.
The word cancer comes from the Greek karkanos, meaning crab, and Hippocrates used that word because tumours can spread out like crab's legs.
For a long time, cancer was poorly understood, and so I think because of that, it was almost scarier, and people didn't even say its name. But what science has done since is replace uncertainty with understanding.
But that understanding isn't instant, because cancer isn't just one disease. It's hundreds of different diseases, each behaving differently depending on where it is and its genes. And that complexity is why progress in cancer research can feel like it's slow. But step by step, research is saving and improving lives.
And that's why Cancer Research UK, the world's largest charitable funder of cancer research, supports work across more than 200 types of cancer, from the tiny changes inside cells that start the disease to better ways to spot it earlier and treat it more precisely.
For more information about Cancer Research UK, their research and breakthroughs, and how you can support them, visit cancerresearchuk.org/the rest is science.
So the Little Albert experiments were done sort of mid-early 20th century. The results were published in 1920. The experiments were conducted at Johns Hopkins by John Watson and his grad student Rosalie Rayner. The goal of the experiment was to see if they could teach a new fear to an emotionally stable child. Like, already it sounds like, let's just assume you can and not try. Mm-hmm. But they both did this. Rosalie is the woman that you see in the videos. If you really want to have a bad time, go to Wikipedia. Look up the Little Albert experiment and you can watch the videos, and she's the one there with the child.
It's horrible.
The research was based on Ivan Pavlov's work with dogs, okay? And I don't know, I'll go on and on about this because I love psychology. But the point is, we've heard of the Pavlovian reactions. What that is about is called classical conditioning. Can I entrain a behavioral response to a originally neutral stimulus? And what that means in the case of the most famous experiment Pavlov did was when dogs are fed, when they smell food, they salivate at the mouth. So what he did is he rang a bell every time he fed his dogs. And not, when I say his dogs, I mean dogs in a laboratory. And he did this for many days until eventually he could just ring the bell and the dogs would start salivating even if he didn't feed them. And he's like, wow, look at this. So this is a huge part of what became behavioralism, the study of human behavior as essentially inputs and outputs. Like we learn things and we can be programmed like a machine. We've got buttons and levers, and a human is kind of just like a steam engine.
There's no evolutionary reason why it should provoke that involuntary response.
Exactly. And so going off of this ringing bell associated with food, we start to combine them and we salivate when we hear a bell. Suddenly that might explain why we're afraid of things, why we love each other, why we decide to do the things we do, why we're greedy, why we're kind. All of this became less popular starting in the 50s. The cognitive revolution changed, and now, even today, we focus more on how we think. Because ultimately, we know too much based on how many inputs we've received. Point is, let's get back to the experiment. Here's what they did. They somehow, they being Watson and Rayner, they found a 9-month-old child. We don't know how. We don't know the actual identity of the child, but in the paper...
Okay. You're doing all right so far. So I have a new task for you, and another breaking news. Water is wet. There's a scout vehicle loaded with supplies at the repair shop, and it's eagerly awaited at the steel mill. We'd have our hands tied without the mill functioning. So kindly find a way to get that truck over the river, if you please. I think you'll have zero problems, considering your past performance. This other job, though, gosh, I think it's just too easy for you. I mean, there's no imminent threat or dangerous adventure to be had. Just a little town that needs help restoring its supply routes. But if I know you, you won't refuse the community in need. So thank you in advance.
They called the child Little Albert. Wasn't its real name.
Was Albert adopted, or were his parents involved in the experiment too? Do we know that?
We don't know, but all of the theories are that the mother was in the picture and aware of what was going on. The extent to which she really had a choice is unclear. She may have worked at the hospital and sort of felt like, I can't really say no because these people are like, you know, they have power over me in the hierarchy of Johns Hopkins research, or they're my boss, you know, or we don't know. There are some guesses as to who the person might have been. The person, the baby, little Albert, may have been, I think the most popular theory is that it was this individual who died at the age of 6 of a condition of the brain unrelated to the experiment, but that throws into question the validity of the results because this infant wasn't a completely, healthy infant. Anyway, what did they do? Okay, so they took this child and they presented it with all kinds of different objects. Literally, you name it, they showed it to the baby, and the baby wasn't scared of any of it. The baby was curious. And then they decided, okay, let's associate something scary with one of these. And the one they chose was was a white lab rat. They allowed the child to play with this lab rat, but every time they introduced the white rat, they hit a steel bar behind the child with a hammer. Boom, really loud. And the child started crying and needed to be consoled and was frightened. And then they would present the child with a rubber duck or a shoe, and they wouldn't hit the steel. Only when the white rat was there would the child be frightened. And sure enough, they were able to teach the child, little Albert, to be afraid of fuzzy white cute things. Mm-hmm. They could present the child with a rabbit and it would get scared. They were even able to present the child...
Marvel at that river. Doesn't it look wonderful? At least it does from the satellite. If only we could trade places for a few minutes. I'd jump right in. You could ford the river if you don't mind getting a bit of water inside your vehicle. Of course, the shipping caravans would need a bridge, be it concrete or wooden. You're not starved for options.
with a Santa Claus mask that had a cotton ball beard, and the child would freak out and cry and scream. And they were like, wow, great job, everybody. We've learned that the human body is a machine that can be programmed and can learn, and like that's just every behavior we have is some kind of learned thing. Now, despite just being like unethical by today's standards, it also didn't give us any good results. Like literally, it was one subject with no control subjects, and they didn't do follow-ups. They didn't then see if they could unlearn the fear from the child. They were just like, excellent, that was cool. And it's very sad.
This is really the reason why this is considered such a sort of bad experiment in the history of science. Of course, there were, look, worse things have happened to people on Earth, right, than them being jump scared. But the key point about this was that they spent days after days after days deliberately frightening a child, right, which is just already quite a horrible image. But they introduced this irrational fear in a human that they never undid, that they had no understanding of how that might go on to impact his life going forwards. And that, exactly as you described, we didn't actually gain any serious or interesting scientific knowledge from.
Yeah, it was not a scientific method experiment. It was a let's poke around and see what happens. Let's poke it and see if it bleeds, and then we'll move on and go catch a movie. I want to say the only sort of silver lining is going to come from that thought of like sometimes out of trauma, growth can occur. Or at least like sometimes it takes despair for there to be triumph. And Watson, after these experiments, did a lot of weekend lectures, and he did one, and in the audience was a woman named Mary Cover Jones. And she was very interested in fear as something that could be learned. And so, of course, she thinks the kind of more kinder thought, which is, well, fine, but we should also maybe focus on how fears can be unlearned. And she happened to know a child that had been brought to her because the child was afraid of fuzzy white things. Strangely, it was not little Albert. This was like I think a 6-year-old. So she says, well, I'm going to do the opposite of little Albert. I'm going to teach a child to not be afraid of furry white things. And she developed a method that involved something that I think a lot of us are familiar with today, gradual exposure, all right? So just slowly introducing fuzzy things to the child, and also having the child hang out with other children who were not afraid of furry things. And she was able to essentially cure the child of this irrational fear that was making the kid's life worse. And to this day, she's considered the mother of behavioral therapy. And so, I don't know, maybe little Albert's sacrifice brought us more quickly to behavioral therapy that helped people's lives. That's the only silver lining I can find in it, but I still think I'd go back and stop it, because if it wasn't Mary Cover Jones, it would be someone else.
Yeah, I mean, I think that science was on that path, right? Of like learned behaviors. Sort of feels like it's only the adjacent possible to that is unlearning behaviors. Great answer, though. And yeah, great answer. I haven't thought about little Albert for a while. I'm not going on the Wikipedia to watch the videos. I remember watching them and finding them. I think maybe I was pregnant at the time or had a very small baby when I first watched them.
Oh, yeah. Terrible time to do it. I saw them in high school in a psychology class, and I was like, what the heck? Let's make adults scared of things. I did that in a Minefield episode. I got electrically shocked every time a purple square was shown on a screen.
Oh yeah,
and it did the same thing. It created an involuntary panic reaction whenever I saw purple squares. But I consented to it.
Has it subsided over time? Can you see purple squares now?
Yeah. It evaporated very quickly.
How are pink squares?
No.
Look away, Michael.
No, I'm fine. I'm not a 9-month-old baby, so I knew what I was in, and I was prepared to accept a fear of purple squares for life. So
Yeah.
I knew what I was getting into. Let's get into something else, though. Here's a question from Dr. Sunny Macon. If superhero powers obeyed basic physics and conservation of energy, which powers are actually the most expensive in energy terms? I'm thinking of things like super strength, flight, and super speed.
Okay, you better believe I got out my calculator, Michael.
Great.
I've run some numbers, baby. Okay, right, super strength. I mean, this is incredibly cheap. There's almost no energy involved in this. So let's say you're trying to lift up a tank, okay? Tank about 60 tons, all right? The work done, right? I'm going back to A-level physics here.
Good.
Mass times gravity times height, okay? That comes out at about 1.2 million joules, which sounds like a lot, but in dietary terms, it's about 280 calories. You're talking one Snickers bar, essentially, half a milkshake, easy peasy. You can do that. It's no big deal.
Like one can of full sugar soda. Yeah. I mean, first of all, I want to take a break. That's like how efficient the human body is.
Right?
There's like,
yeah.
Oh, you drank one can of soda. You better go lift. What was this that we're lifting? A
tank.
A tank. Go lift a tank, and then you can earn yourself another. I don't want to say earn. Basically, let me just leave it at that. The human body is really efficient.
Well, it's also the wrong way to think about it. Like, if you go on a treadmill and you're counting calories on your treadmill and you finish and you've like exhausted yourself and it's like 60 calories, you can have half a peanut.
Yes.
That's not the exact. It's extremely, extremely depressing. But the key point is that just being alive, just breathing, just being upright, just existing and thinking uses up a lot of calories. So you shouldn't ever think of calories as a sort of an equation in terms of your physical exertion. But I'm doing it purely for the purposes of this question. And super strength is very cheap and easy, okay? Flight, I'm going to go medium level for flight, okay?
Okay.
So if you are, I'm going to just, ignore the aerodynamics and just, and just think of you pushing against gravity, keeping yourself up. That essentially means that you need to be a human inefficient helicopter, okay? So if you're going to hover, you've got to accelerate air downwards, and for a human-sized object, I work that out to be about, let's say, 100 kilowatts of power. Well, that's quite a lot, actually. That is quite a lot. You're going to have to eat. Please check my calculations, by the way, on this. You can write to me, tell me I've got it wrong. But I think that's about 300 burgers per hour, which is quite a lot, actually. You've got to pump through quite a lot there. I'm not using aerodynamics. If you were going forwards, if you were gliding, it would be more efficient. But I'm just saying, if you can just move yourself upwards like a rubbish helicopter. So that's kind of medium. But by a long way, the thing that is going to bankrupt you energy-wise is super speed.
Really?
Super speed is off the scale. So because for starters, you've got kinetic energy. Kinetic energy, by the way, is the equation for it is half mv squared. Notice that v squared. So the faster you get, if you run twice as fast, you need 4 times the amount of energy. So super speed it's going to scale very, very quickly. If you run at 1% of the speed of light, which is compared to like a cosmic ray, for example,
It's nothing.
snail's pace. It's
It's
nothing.
not moving. Yeah.
you've also got air resistance here that you've got to consider.
I was wondering if you were going to factor that in. Yeah.
Here it is. Air resistance scales with V cubed, my friend. It's the cube law. Oh, lordy. So if you're going to run twice as fast through air, you need 8 times the power to push the air out of the way. So, let's make it slower. Let's just say you're running at the speed of sound. You're not just burning calories. You're generating heat from air compression. That's enough to melt lead. And if you're trying to run at the speed of light, which I think is what Superman does. I've seen the videos of him circulating the Earth. I don't think it was a documentary, but but yeah, I mean, you're going to be causing nuclear explosions all over the place. I'll be honest with you. Every time I do one of these calculations, it ends in nuclear explosions.
As it should. So super speed, I mean, yeah, listening to you explain it makes sense. Super speed also requires super strength because you're having to push an enormous amount of air out of the way very quickly.
Yeah, you really are.
All right, so we went from a Snickers bar to 300 hamburgers an hour to constant nuclear bomb explosions.
Exactly. Just a simple scale. Simple linear hop, skip, and a jump from one to the other. Okay, all right, here's another question. Oh, okay, this is nice. This is from Owen, who wants to know when we first met, Michael.
Oh, yeah.
I remember. Do you remember?
I think I remember. I think we've talked about this before. I mean, I was aware of you because of your appearances on Numberphile.
Correct.
I don't know how we got in touch, but we went to lunch. Why did we do that, though? Like, did I have your email address?
Let's think about what year this was. This was probably, what do you reckon, 2014, maybe?
That year would have been 2015.
2015, there you go. You were working at YouTube in London.
Yeah.
And you had been running Vsauce for a few years by then already. So I had obviously watched every single one of your videos.
Yeah, of course.
As most of the internet had. And I was in YouTube recording a video. And then as I was leaving, you happened to be in the lift, right?
That makes sense. Okay, so we just ran into each other at the YouTube office in London.
Yeah. You were very cool, and I was not.
What do you mean cool?
I remember the entire conversation, Michael. You were like, I was like, oh my God, it's Vsauce, and didn't want to say anything, and stood in the corner. And then you were like, oh, hang on, you're Hannah. And I was like, oh my God.
No kid, really?
Yeah.
Because I was really nervous. Because you were like an actual smart person. I was just a guy who was like, look at this cool thing.
And then I was like, oh my God, you know who I am? And you were like, well, yeah, it's kind of my job to know. I work for YouTube, right? It's kind of my job to know.
True.
And then you said that you were working on a video for Banach Tarski and you needed a proper mathematician. And I didn't know any of those.
We had lunch and you were gracious enough to listen to me basically do the Banach Tarski video live.
Which was great.
And I just needed someone to tell me, does this make sense? Can it be followed? Are there any egregious mistakes? And your interest in it, and also the fact that you weren't immediately like, okay, no, this is obviously wrong, gave me so much confidence
that
I made the video. And if you look at the history of Vsauce, that's a turning point in the channel where I went from, could you eat your own poop if you cooked it first? To, I'm going to take a long time to really dive into something, to explain something that I can't understand, that hasn't been taught, I think, just in the right way yet. And I'm not going to do it right either, but I'll at least add a different voice to it. And so every video after that is like more than 20 minutes long. Every video before that one is like 8 minutes long. So yeah, you played this like pivotal role in the evolution of the channel and myself. So that's how we met.
The Banach Tarski video, by the way, I should tell everybody, is talking about a extremely obscure and mind-bending mathematical theorem where when you take the surface of a sphere and rearrange it in a particular way, you can end up with two of the original object without adding or deleting anything. It's extremely mind-bending. And I think up until that point, really nobody had delved into anything that complicated in a public forum, in a something that was to be consumed by everybody. And those of you who haven't seen Michael's video on Banach Tarski, I think it's got something like tens and tens of millions of views, right?
Yeah, something like that.
It is wild to the entire mathematical world that you could take something that mind-bendy and bring it to so many people.
I know. There's an appetite for it online. And I think ever since then, not that I started it, but I knew these things would be popular. And now, thankfully, we've got 3 Blue 1 Brown. We've got all these channels that are like, no, let's do it. Let's get into this. And now it's like, no matter how deep of a question I have, I'm like, what exactly is...
This may just update the definition. Looks like my kid's room after a study session. I use the term study loosely. I guess it falls to you to play the parent and clean the plant yard. Then you need to build a road and use it to deliver the vital equipment. I'm sure you can handle it.
Energy, or why did chimneys break in the middle when they fall? There's always some like Indian YouTuber who's like, let's get into it, and they draw out every single thing and what each formula means, and it makes me feel so great for the human race.
Yeah.
That we want this kind of content. So yeah, with Banach Tarski, there's like one thing I wish I had done differently, which is the way I describe choosing the first set of points from the sphere. I could have been more clear about. So one of these days I'll revisit it. But yeah, the point is that this very paradoxical dissection puzzle requires removing points in very precise ways and then putting them back together and like, oh crap, I have 2 now. Wait, where did all this extra stuff come from? But that's how we met.
There you go. Oh, that was a really lovely question. Thank you. That's thank you very much, Owen. I promised you some thermal insulation, and I'm going to deliver. I'm going to deliver on the most exciting thermal insulation that there is. Not just in the world, but I'm going to say in the solar system. Okay, that's where I'm going with this, because I'm talking space here. I want to bring you back, Michael, to the 1950s, when the space race was in full force, and there was an incredibly difficult problem that people were trying to solve, which is how on earth do you get vehicles from space back to Earth? The re-entry vehicles for NASA. Now, the thing is that getting rockets out of the atmosphere, actually that bit's kind of easy. I mean, maybe easy is a bit strong, but it's not too difficult. When you're coming back down, though, you are travelling at such an unimaginable speed that you have so much air that needs to get out of your way. You're squashing this air so rapidly with such a force that the temperatures that you start reaching are way higher than basically any human-made product could withstand. So back in the 1950s, there's a guy called Harvey Allen, and he set the task of designing these re-entry vehicles for NASA. And the first ideas, everyone was like, well, we just need it to be like a rocket shape, basically. We need to make it as streamlined as possible.
Like slice through the air.
Yeah, like a needle, right? Pierce through it, get through the atmosphere quickly, minimize the drag, minimize the friction forces on the side, get in. But these temperatures, these speeds, I mean, they are so massive that it just wasn't, nothing would work. So Harvey had this absolutely genius idea, because he realized that when something is streamlined, all of that heat is going to happen right next to the skin of the vehicle, right? It's like literally on the surface. And really what you want some kind of like a buffer, like a protective blanket that you can sort of wrap around the re-entry vehicle and take some of that heat away. So his idea was, what if instead of making it streamlined, you just deliberately make it as unstreamlined as possible, right? What if we make the aerospace equivalent of a manhole cover, right? That's essentially what he was thinking. And the point about this is that if you re-enter the atmosphere with like a massive flat wall, then the air that's getting crushed, it can't get out of the way quick enough, so it ends up forming this basically a cushion at the front of the vehicle. You get a much bigger shock wave, you get way more friction, but it happens away from the skin of the vehicle, so that then it's not in direct contact with the sort of human-made substances around the side, but it's kind of directed around it, right? I love this idea. I love this idea of backwards thinking. And this is exactly what they ended up doing. So even, they started off with these sort of these round shapes. The Russians copied the ideas, they used spheres. The Americans sort of settled on that cone shape, which would come in, it's sort of belly flopping into the atmosphere. And then even the space shuttle, which looks more like a plane, right? But when it would come into the atmosphere, it wouldn't go nose first and dive through. It belly flops, right?
Right.
It kind of comes in. So this was the general idea, but even still, the temperatures on the surface could still get up to 1,250 degrees centigrade, right? Still vastly higher than anything that would be, you can't have like a metal skin on the outside, for example.
Because it would melt.
Because it would melt, exactly. So I should tell you, actually, I did a video on this. I did a little social media video about this. I really love the aerodynamics of re-entry vehicles. I just think there's something deeply amusing to me about there being such a difficult problem and people turning it upside down and going for the most unaerodynamic space possible. So I did this video about it, and then I was in California, and I was in Google actually, and someone came up to me and they were like, "Oh, I knew you were going to be here today. I just finished working for NASA, now I work for Google, and I have for you a tile of the particular material that was used on the space shuttle. This is the material that they came up with that was the workaround for these absolutely insane temperatures on the space shuttle."
Yeah, we're looking at a tile of, it looks like white foam. It's about the size of a domino, or maybe two dominoes on top of each other, stacked hamburger style. But it's also striated on the sides like a cake made of very thin layers all stacked up with black and white lines. It's a glossy black paint on one face, one of the large faces, but then it's white everywhere else except for those thin black lines on the sides. And on the back, though, it looks like it's made almost differently of transversely organized sections.
Basically, what you have is these many, many, many layers, both horizontally and vertically. And this is actually, it's pure silica. It's 100% silica. But it's these fibers that are laid in such a way that this block is 94% air. Okay? So it messes with your mind because you look at it, it sort of looks like, I don't know, like a piece of chalk, perhaps. It's sort of white and it's got almost powdery.
Yeah, I was going to say like ceramic or chalk.
Yeah. But when you pick it up, it's way lighter than you would than your brain thinks it's going to be. It's unbelievably light. It's essentially solid air. That's what they've created. Solid air.
Solid air. I love that.
Trapped in a cage of silica. It was invented by Lockheed Missiles and Space Company. This one specifically for the space shuttle. It's called LI 900. The 900 in it stands for its density. It's 9 pounds per cubic foot. Okay, so there you go, Americans. This is you can tell this is made in America.
Yeah.
Right. But for context, by the way, styrofoam is 3 pounds per cubic foot. So this is slightly heavier than styrofoam, but not by much. It's sort of that's the sort of weight that it is. The thing about this stuff is that it is, because it is, sort of solid air in a lot of ways, you could easily crush this. You could just put your hand through it. I mean, it sort of feels quite fragile under your fingers. Now the thing is, all of these little pockets of air in here, air is this unbelievably good insulator. Heat doesn't really like traveling across air gaps.
Yeah.
So when you have, an unimaginable number of tiny little caged air bubbles inside a material like this, it means that it is so poor at conducting heat that you can literally put this in a kiln, heat it to well over 1,000 degrees centigrade, 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
So it's glowing hot.
Glowing hot, literally red hot. And yet you can still pick it up with your bare hands, because it is so bad at conducting heat that it's not going to burn your skin. Right? It's wild. It's wild. There's this video of people doing that.
I've seen the video, but I never really knew what they were made of. But now hearing your description of these silica fibers makes me think that it's almost like a possibly safer version of asbestos.
Right.
Because both of them are like woven rock fibers made into a material. They're both bad to get in your lungs, but I don't know, that silica stuff might be a little bit less carcinogenic. Only one way to find out, though.
Hey, come back in 5 years.
Let's see.
So I'll probably put it back in a little box, shall I? I didn't know that's how asbestos works. Is asbestos like trapping loads of, just traps loads of air molecules in it, does it?
Yeah, it's like it's also like it's rock, so it's flame proof, fire resistant, and it traps in air, and so it insulates really well. It doesn't burn. It's really marvelous stuff, except for that one problem.
That one tiny thing. There was asbestos in my house actually when we did up my house. There was asbestos everywhere, and I got really scared because I'd had my babies in this house, sort of sleeping next to asbestos walls.
Yeah.
And they said that actually, until you disturb it, it's completely fine.
It's fine. It's a rock. It's sitting there. But once you decide to remove it, that's when you've got to do a lot of safe precautions, because it breaks into little tiny like needles that float in the air, and you breathe them in, they get stuck in your lungs. They don't dissolve or digest or anything because it's rock. Mm-hmm. And for reasons I'm not really clear of, it also accelerates cancer. It's not just like it clogs up your lungs. So, yeah. What is that? What is the disease called? Mesothelioma?
Something like that. We should talk to our friends at Cancer Research UK. and ask
We
them all
should.
about it. Yeah.
Yes.
So here's the thing. Okay, so this idea of LI 900, they knew that they'd solved it, that they'd found something that was this unbelievably good thermal insulator. But these tiles are so incredibly fragile. You can't have them as big. They can't be large. They couldn't just create these massive tiles, put them in, and off you go. The space shuttle wasn't covered in this uniform blanket. It was covered in 2,400 tiny individual tiles.
Oh, wow.
And because the space shuttles bend and flexed during flight, you can't just glue all of these tiles directly to the metal skin underneath, because they would snap. So there was this strain isolation pad, which was then glued to the ship, and then every single tile on top had a unique shape, right? Which means that if you broke one of them, you couldn't just go and grab one off the shelf.
You've got to grab that shape.
That exact shape, that custom replacement for that specific coordinate. These were an engineering nightmare, these things, because the other issue is that, these are 94% empty space, right? They're solid air, as it were, which means it's incredibly porous. So if it's raining... If it's raining while the shuttle's sitting on the launch pad, the tiles would absorb hundreds of kilos of water.
Right. They would become solid liquid water.
Solid liquid water, exactly. And then you've got problems of, maybe that water could freeze, it could expand, It would shatter all the tiles, it would boil off in orbit, it would blow them all apart.
A lot of extra weight suddenly you've got to launch, yeah.
Right, so then they're having to inject these tiles with this waterproofing agent, basically, Scotch-Guard on steroids, essentially. Via a needle, they've got to do it in all of these gaps and all of these holes. But they one of the ways round this to sort of seal the outside is, especially on the belly, is they have this glaze that they put on it, this reaction cured glass, this borosilicate, and that helps to seal it, but also maximizes the heat immiscibility, sort of sheds heat back into space. So these are on the bottom, and then the white tiles, these are the ones on the top.
Yeah.
Cool, huh? Isn't that cool?
Yeah, because the bottom of the space shuttle is black. And so I was wondering, so is that what I'm looking at there? Yeah, the black side is the side that faces out during the belly flop.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing, though? This complete paradoxical material, something that's fragile enough to be crushed by a toddler, but strong enough to survive this plunge through the atmosphere at over 1,000 degrees.
Yeah, I think that describes a lot of people I know. I love it too because we talk so much about to leave Earth, how hard it is to leave, to have the delta V required to leave our cradle, and yet coming back home is its own engineering problem. It's like the Earth doesn't want to accept us back readily.
I always thought that was the hardest bit, the whole thing about whether the moon landing was real or not. I always thought that the argument for me was that getting to the moon and landing on the moon, actually, difficult, but not anywhere near as difficult as the problem of getting back off the moon, getting back down to Earth and landing safely. And that was always the thing, is that you had this moment in time, these unbelievable geopolitical pressure for this, for the space race, combined with, launching missiles and nuclear weapons from space, and all of the sort of defense side of things that came with that. But you also had incredibly gung-ho pilots. I don't think it would have been difficult to find somebody who was willing to do a suicide mission to the moon and just stay there. That bit wasn't hard. So it always seemed to me that the showy bit wasn't the hard bit, which makes me believe that they did the entire thing.
Have you seen that video where the guy shows that in 1969, it would have been easier to have gone to the moon and come back than it would have been to create a broadcast of that length? A pre-recorded film segment? Yeah. He's like, actually, that feed of the moon landing is so long that if you had done it in a studio beforehand on film, and then you had to play it back like it was live and not have a single piece of dust or a hair on it, not allow any mistake to show that you're just playing back a reel, like that would have been an even bigger technological miracle than actually going to the moon and back. It's a very fascinating video.
Yeah, I think, I sort of vaguely do remember it. He was talking about the size of the reels, like the physical size of the reel of tape, right, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, because he's talking about like hours and hours of footage that is like streamed out onto televisions, and somehow it needs to never look that way. It needs to look like a live broadcast. So it probably was, because if they had solved that, that would have been more unbelievable and more of an achievement than the moon landing.
The other argument that I find compelling is that how many thousands of people were involved, right? How many, the cleaners, the janitors, the like people who are painting the walls, all the way through to the engineers and the astronauts and the people in politics. Not one of them, however many decades later, slipped up and accidentally told everyone that it was a ruse. I mean, I just don't believe in humans that much. I just don't believe in humans' abilities to keep secrets that much.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, we're hearing from our producer that LI 900 would need exposure to 1,450 degrees centigrade for hours, then crushed to have any carcinogenic potential whatsoever. So, live to fight another day, Michael.
Wow,
But
you're safe. Okay.
Important that you recognise I was willing to put my life into your hands for the purposes
I know. I know. But now we know that you were safe all along, so I feel better.
all along. All right, well, I guess we'll leave it there for this week. As ever, if you have any questions, ideas, tiles off the space shuttle that you want to send us, you can email us, therestiscience@goalhanger.com.
And you can join our newsletter at therestis.com/science.
We're going to be back next Thursday with another edition of Field Notes, and on Tuesday with our normal episode.
So until then, stay curious.
Hello, I'm Hannah Fry.
I'm Michael Stevens.
And this is The Rest is Science. We're talking smell today, Michael.
Smell. Yeah. Okay, well, let me ask you this, Hannah. What do you smell right now?
Like, honestly, not very much. I'm in my house. Normally I have a scented candle on in the corner. Don't know at the moment. I can't really smell anything. I mean, this is like, it's the inferior sense. There's not much going on. I can't smell anything.
Whoa. The inferior sense? Your nose can hear what you're saying.
It's going to testify against me one day.
We're going to talk about that in this episode. Is our sense of smell inferior in some way? But I want you, the listener, to also answer this question to yourself. What do you smell right now? I can kind of smell the soda I have in this mug over here. It's pretty weak, but otherwise, yeah, it's a pretty odor neutral environment that I'm in. I think we live in very odor neutral environments, or we think we do.
Because I wonder if we swapped. If we did we invented wormholes for the purposes of this discussion and then just immediately swapped. You kind of came into my house, I came into your studio. I reckon in the first instant of walking in there, neither of us would think that it smelled of nothing. I mean, I like to imagine that you think that mine smells of roses and beautiful perfume and window cleaner and fabric softener and all of the lovely smells.
Yeah, and it probably would, right? It would smell like something. It would not smell like the nothing it smells to you. My favorite game to play is to go on a vacation and then come back and stop before I go into my house and just prepare myself to smell myself. I can smell what my house smells like to guests because I've been gone for weeks. And for like a half a minute, I'm going to be able to smell what they smell.
That's a really fun idea.
You got to do it.
I also have a game that I play when I go on holiday, which is if it's going to be a really nice holiday, I will buy a particular scented candle and I will light it when I'm on that holiday. So this is on my honeymoon, for example. And then in the future, whenever I want to feel like I'm back there. So I have 4 or 5 different scents that's like put on that candle and transported back to that place.
That's brilliant. You know, there was an artist who created necklaces that contained a little ampule of a very unique smelling compound. And if something ever happened in your life that you wanted to remember forever, you could break the ampule and have this new scent that would be tagged to that memory for the rest of your life.
Oh, that's a fantastic idea. Well, hold on a second, right? If the inside of your house smells like something to everybody else and to you for the first few moments when you arrive back from holiday, I wonder what else is constantly around you that also has a smell that you can't smell.
Yeah, what does the inside of your nose smell like?
This episode is brought to you by Cancer Research UK.
Dinosaurs walked the Earth 180 million years ago. But did you know cancer was part of their story too? Scientists have found tumors in ancient fossils.
Well, that is a part of the reason why cancer is a big part of our story, right? It's the other side of evolution. It's the most complex disease that we face. There are more than 200 types of cancer in total, each with distinct characteristics, challenges, and mysteries.
And that complexity demands scale. Cancer Research UK is the world's largest charitable funder of cancer research, with more than 4,000 scientists, doctors, and nurses working across more than 20 countries in the search for answers, and then sharing their discoveries beyond borders.
And the impact of this collaboration is clear, because over the last 50 years, the charity's pioneering work has helped to double cancer survival in the UK. That is more people who are living longer, better lives.
Fossils can show us the past, but research is shaping the future. And for more information about Cancer Research UK, their research, breakthroughs, and how you can support them, visit cancerresearchuk.org/restiscience.
Well, if we're going to get to the bottom of these questions, I think we should first turn to an assumption which is still quite popular. The fact that smell is the inferior sense. Shall we start there?
Yeah, give me your case.
This is essentially Victorians being dismissive of anything they didn't consider highfalutin, right? So there's a French guy, Paul Broca. Broca?
I say Broca.
Okay, so Broca. In the Victorian era, he started looking at particularly the olfactory bulb in the brain, which is actually incredibly small, particularly compared to other animals. And so he said, look, this is kind of pathetic for us. And actually the Victorians, the English scientists at the time, they were very happy with this. They were like, this means that we've transcended the kind of animal-like senses, right? Like we've got sight and hearing. That's why we can do art and science and have intellect and, smell and taste. They're sort of much more animal-like, right? It's more like about kind of dirt and lust and like savages. Those are the things that care about smell.
Right.
We've evolved out of it. And that essentially is the reason people are very snobby about smell and have been for a long time.
That's so Victorian.
Very Victorian, isn't it?
But at the end of the day, we're made of dust and lust, and pretending that we aren't is like the classic predicament of our modern age, Hannah.
Mm-hmm. You can smell the difference between coffee grounds and like soil after rain, pencil shavings or like wet dog. If you spend even a moment thinking about this, which perhaps the Victorians should have done, we are so good at smelling that you can put a ripe banana, right, hide it in a drawer or in a cupboard or something, and then get a person to go in and ask them to guess what has been hidden, and people will get it right. We are incredibly sensitive to this chemical that gets released by ripe fruit. We're so sensitive to it. We can detect a few parts per trillion. We can way more sensitive to this than dogs are, by the way. Dogs don't really care about ripe bananas. Humans hone in on it, absolutely want to know.
Yeah. Okay. So there are things about our olfaction system that are pretty impressive. So I want to direct our attention to a really great paper from 2010. The whole thing is a great read, and they address the fact that there's this problem in the way we think about smell. We think that dogs are great at smelling and cats are really good, but humans are bad. It turns out that humans aren't bad. All mammals have the same kind of olfactory system. Humans can differentiate, seemingly
trillions of different smells.
Trillions.
If you give them two smells and you say, are these different? They can tell down to tiny percent changes that it's different. However, that doesn't mean that we can identify trillions of different smells. We have to be paying attention to smell.
We can tell the difference between spearmint, the smell of spearmint, right? And then caraway, right? If you can imagine how distinctive those two are. Those are actually, when you look at the molecular structure of those two, that the molecules that give them their distinctive flavors, they're actually totally identical to one another. It's just that one is the mirror flip of the other. So essentially, it's effectively like being able to tell the difference between a left and a right-handed glove, you know? That's essentially how good we are at it.
Have you ever smelled ethyl mercaptan?
No.
You have if you've ever smelled a gas leak. Because propane, natural gas, these things are odorless. But that's dangerous. If there's a leak, no one can tell unless they've got special instruments. So they add a chemical called ethyl mercaptan to propane, natural gas, the stuff that comes out of your stove, your gas stove. That stuff doesn't normally smell. So when you smell it, when you think you're smelling gas, you're smelling the odorant that's added so that we can detect it. And I want to give you a little side story. When I was a kid, a truckload of ethyl mercaptan crashed near my house, and it smelled like there was a gas leak. But actually, it was just the odorant. And every day on the school bus, we would drive through this area where you could smell that odorant. And the kids would all go, "Oh, don't light a match, it's gas." And I'd be like, actually, that's the ethyl mercaptan odorant that's added. And then I became the odorant boy. Like, they just mocked me. Whenever we smelled it, they'd go, "Oh, Michael, is that actually gas or is it the odorant? Oh, look at me, I'm Michael." And I've never forgotten that.
I like to imagine that a young Michael Stevens was just exactly the same as you are now, just smaller. Just literally identical, just a slightly smaller version.
Yeah, just imagine this head with this beard, but on like a kid body.
Exactly.
Well, but I bring up ethyl mercaptan because we are really sensitive to it. We can detect 0.009 parts per billion. That's the equivalent of like 3 drops in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. Wow. Okay, you could put 3 drops in. An Olympic pool is big. I could do that to one pool and not another, and you could tell me which pool had it and which one didn't. But this brings us back to where we started, Hannah. When you put this odorant, the ethyl mercaptan, in gas, you don't put in 0.009 parts per billion. You put in 0.5 parts per million. That's 57,000 times more than we need to detect. Why? Because even though we can detect small trace amounts, it doesn't get our attention. We have to be slapped in the nose by a smell to notice it. Like, we can listen, but we only pay attention if it's screaming.
That point about how we have to be kind of slapped in the nose in order to notice it, that's not true of other creatures. So there's this story about, in the 1930s in Texas, they were building these gas pipelines across country, right? These huge, long pipes that would go for hundreds and hundreds of miles. And because they were pumping in natural gas, it had ethyl mercaptan added to it. And what they noticed was that every now and then there would be these turkey vultures that would circle above the pipes. And all of these gas engineers initially were like, what on earth is going on there? Like, why are these vultures obsessed with this particular section on the pipe? And they would go and investigate, and time after time, they would find that the vultures were circling over where there was a leak in the pipe, right? And so it kind of became like folklore, if you like, among gas engineers in this particular area, that you look out for vultures and that would tell you where a leak was. And then in the 1960s, a couple of scientists were like, this sounds nonsense. That, like, I think they hadn't honed it down to being ethyl mercaptan at that point. They just knew that vultures were circling. And this group of scientists were like, okay, are vultures really hunting based on smell? So what they did is they got a dead pig, they hid it in some woods under a bit of tarpaulin, and then in another separate set of woods they just constructed the same experiment, but there wasn't a dead pig underneath the tarpaulin. And almost immediately these turkey vultures managed to find the dead pig, but weren't interested at all in the other bit of tarpaulin. And it turns out that ethyl mercaptan is like this compound that is released when bodies decompose.
Oh,
so
wow.
it's essentially the smell of death that attracts vultures, but that we are deliberately putting in as this like smell signature in order to sort of save us from gas leaks.
That makes sense, that we would evolve to be really sensitive to an odor released by decaying flesh. It's a good danger warning. For vultures, it's a dinner bell. But
Yeah.
either way, it's really salient. You need to know if it's around. But humans in particular have to be punched really hard to notice a smell. If we are specifically told to try to smell something, we take a different kind of a sniff than usual, not a breathing sniff, but a smelling sniff, and then we can detect something. But if we're just normally breathing, there needs to be a lot of odorant around for us to notice it. And there are a couple of really fascinating consequences of this, and they all point to why we think smell is such an inferior sense. The second thing, though, is what I found the most fascinating, which is that it's also related to attention, and it's the fact that humans have remarkably bad olfactory coordinate systems in our brains. We can find bananas, but we can't find a lot of stuff the way other animals can. When a room smells, the room smells. We don't think, oh man, that area of the room is smelly, the way that we would with sight or sound. If I'm in a room and there's a sound, I'm like, ugh, the workers on the roof are loud, or the refrigerator is loud. It's really, in my awareness, in a spatial location. Same with a light, the source of a light. It's very much about a point in space where the light is coming from, but smells are just present. We don't have binocular smell like we do binocular sight. Even though we have two nostrils, we don't do a good job of going, oh, yep, okay, let me go right to where the source of the smell is. It's just a stinky place. And there's a theory that we don't rely on smell much because we just don't have the same conscious interior map of smells that we have for our other senses.
Yeah. If you think about colour, right, you can put colour on a spectrum. We sort of have like a map, as it were, of like how one colour relates to another. With smells, like sure, we might be able to smell like the scent of ground, the smell of pencil shavings, but it's not like we're able to relate one to another.
That's right. There's no rainbow of smells.
Yeah.
Where we're like, oh, make that a little bit more XYZ. And funny enough, if you read up on smells, you'll find 3 systems of organizing odors listed, and none of them have a link to an article. Like, none of them are common enough or clear enough that it's expounded anymore. It's just like, oh yeah, some guy tried to create a spectrum of smell or a coordinate system of smell in the sense of like sweeter, more bitter. I don't know. It's hard for us even to describe them and compare them the way we can talk about color.
So is the idea then that in other animals like dogs, for instance, which we know to have this absolutely phenomenal sense of smell, not just in sensing it, but also in mapping it physically, right? Like
and paying attention to it.
And paying attention to it. I heard this story once. I was talking to someone who was an ex-army dog trainer, and he told me this story about how during major conflicts, when you have these military zones, you have people who are often trying to smuggle vast sums of cash over these borders. And it can be really pernicious, right? It can be really dramatic. It can be used to buy arms, it can be used to bribe people, all that kind of thing. So of course, the military want to try and stop these like big chunks of cash getting smuggled. So what they did is they took all of these dogs and they took them to a lab, and they were like, right, we're going to teach these dogs how to smell money. And like money doesn't have like a distinctive odor, but there's lots of things like the ink, the kind of the oil that's left in people's hands. There's like a kind of catalogue of different smells that might be associated with it. And the dogs in the training were really good. Like they were amazing at finding these wads of cash, no matter where you'd hide them. And exactly as you're describing, the dogs are able to like spatially pinpoint precisely where the smell is coming from, rather than just that the smell exists and is there. Anyway, they then took the dogs out into the field and tried it again, and all of a sudden the dogs were absolute rubbish, right? Like where they'd like got hit after hit after hit in the lab, take them out to the military zone and they just weren't able to do it. Even when they had people who were subsequently caught smuggling cash. The dogs had not managed to let it go. And they were really wondering what on earth was going on until they finally realised that the difference between the lab conditions and the military zone was that when in the lab, the money had been wrapped in cling film in order that people didn't steal it, didn't go everywhere. And they had inadvertently taught in this extremely expensive program these dogs to detect cling film. I mean, that's how good these dogs smell is. Does cling film really have that strong a scent?
No, I think money and cling film, I couldn't smell the difference. But research has shown that we can. We just choose not to.
Just choose not to.
Yeah, and we just don't sniff enough. That's humans' problem, Hannah. A rat, especially, every breath they take is a sniff. There's a difference between I'm breathing through my nose and I'm smelling through my nose, right? Well, multiple times a second, a rat is smelling. It's like bringing odorant molecules from the environment up into its olfactory bulb to think about and experience. But we only do that every few seconds. Most of human breathing is just for the air, and then every so often we might go take a bigger one that really gets odorants on that olfactory bulb. But because there's such a long gap in between them, we don't often notice changes. It's a bit like if you looked at two pictures where, there's only find the 7 differences. They're similar pictures otherwise. If you look at one and then you don't look at the other one until a week later, you're not going to do a very good job. If you look at them simultaneously, it becomes easier. We have this thing called change anosmia, where we cannot detect changes in the odors around us unless they're really extreme. Now, this is based on change blindness, a famous thing that we've known about for a long time when it comes to vision, that we often don't pay attention to a scene and a little bit of it can be changed and we won't notice. But for smells, we basically live in a constant state of change anosmia.
You really have to be properly smacked in the nose. The spot the difference picture has to really fundamentally change for you to notice it effectively.
Yeah.
Actually also, we think of rats as smelly, but maybe we're sort of conflating the smell of rats with the smell of sewers. Do you reckon rats can smell sewers or smell themselves?
Oh, I bet they can, because they're so much more attentive to smells.
Well, given that in London you're never more than 2 meters away from a rat, I'll just nip downstairs, see if I can find one and ask them during the break, shall I? I'll see if I can do that.
All right, welcome back. Hannah, what did the rats tell you?
Nothing. They ran away as soon as I approached, which is, one of the good things about being much, much larger than them.
Right, and they could smell you coming.
I saw them sniffing the air, pointedly. Actually, on the subject of sewers, there was a kid in my class at school whose dad worked in sewers. And he would always say that you would only smell for the first couple of minutes. And then after that, just smell like nothing. What is weird is that even when you try, there's lots of things that you pay attention to, don't pay attention to, and they sort of blend into the background. But when you can actively make a choice to pay attention to something, that's interesting that even when you try and smell the inside of your nose, you can't.
I know. It's called olfactory fatigue. You cannot try to smell even if you try, because you've adapted to it to the point at which your neurons cannot even respond to that smell anymore. One way this happens is called acclimatization, where the actual vesicles in your nerve cells that contain neurotransmitters that send them across the synapse, that has to happen for you to have the smell experience, but they've run out of vesicles. You just used up way too many because you can't stop smelling the inside of your nose. All of it's happened. They've run out of the ability to transmit messages, and so you don't get it anymore. Even if you try, they don't have the letters, they don't have the paper to write the letter to your brain on.
You've used up all your spoons, basically.
You've used them all up. So you can try, and you're just never going to smell your nose because you smelled it, I guess, when you were born.
For 1.5 minutes.
Yeah, it ran out, hasn't been able to replenish. And now there will be changes because the inside of your nose can smell weird when you have a cold or, when there's something weird in your mucus. And then you'll gradually get used to that. You'll notice when the smell is gone. So you only get these brief windows of awareness of your own scent, and then it's gone.
If I am ever lucky enough to attend the birth of another human, the main thing I'm going to be thinking about is as they immediately are born into the world and take their first breaths, it's going to be, lucky you.
Another part of change anosmia is adaptation, that we wind up adapting to smells really quickly.
So like when you go into a fish shop, as you first walk in, or even, not to make a direct comparison between the two, Michael, but when you return home after your holiday, you can smell it in the first few moments, and then after that a certain amount of time passes, you can no longer smell it.
Well, yeah, but it's called sensory adaptation. It doesn't just happen with the nose. It happens with vision and sound as well. You can get used to the sound in a place. You visit someone's house and there's this noise and you're like, doesn't that annoy you? And they're like, I don't hear it anymore. But with smell, it happens really quickly.
So it's about efficiency then, essentially. It's about our brains finding like the most efficient way to process information and ignoring anything that's not important to us in the moment.
Yeah, it is. It doesn't mean that we are receiving no olfactory data. It just means that it's all non-conscious. So there has been a lot of research recently on the non-conscious influence of smells around us, where we don't think we're smelling anything, but we are. We think that we enjoy a scent for all the wrong reasons. They've done a lot of studies on like deodorant smells, and it's been found that people prefer deodorants that are the closest in molecular structure and odor to the person's own natural cellular scent.
What? Explain that to me.
So there was a study done famously on dirty T-shirts. I'm starting with a different study, where they looked at what kind of sweaty T-shirts that were worn by men, straight women would prefer.
Sure.
And they preferred the smell of shirts that were the most different from the natural odor profile of the woman.
Okay. So you are looking for someone who smells different to you. That sort of makes sense.
It makes sense for perhaps like an adaptation to avoid inbreeding.
Right. Is there an extreme? I mean, I do sort of wonder whether there's a sweet spot here. Like you want someone who doesn't smell absolutely the same to you, but you also want someone who's not too far away from you either. You know? I don't know. It's a bit difficult to finish that sentence without claiming that some humans really smell, but they do.
Right. Well, we all smell. The inside of our noses all smell. I think if we scraped some mucus out of your nose, I could probably sniff it and go, oh yeah, that's got a smell.
Please don't. I beg you not to.
I won't do it, but I'm just saying that like we have a smell and we can't smell ourselves. And I spent a lot of yesterday trying to find the best way to smell your own scent, and we just don't know how. Because you could like shower. Okay, showering makes it hard to smell yourself, but as soon as you get out, you've altered your own smell. You can leave your house for weeks and come back, and the scent of your house kind of gives you a sense of what you smell like. Apparently, that trick that perfumists use, where they have someone smell coffee beans in between in order to cleanse the olfactory palate, apparently that doesn't work. People aren't able to smell things better after sniffing coffee beans versus lemon juice or just plain air.
Let me go back to that deodorant thing though, because I'm intrigued by that. Wait, so people prefer deodorant that smells more like them?
That's right. So then, years later in a follow-up study, some researchers had women take showers and then put on deodorants. And some of these deodorants were built, like chemically made to mimic the chemical composition of the outside of that woman's cells, which is a very particular thing. It's unique to each one of us. That's part of what makes us smell like ourselves. And the women weren't told that this was the case. They were just told, oh, we're trying out different smells. But there was no masking smell. It wasn't like it's lavender with some of you in it. It was just you or not you. And the women preferred the deodorants that had their unique genetic chemical composition.
Because it smelled more, I don't know, familiar.
Like them, like familiar.
This is a bit of me.
Yeah.
Because I am interested by that. And the reason why is that I think like when it comes to sort of hygiene, right, and like cleanliness products, I also think that there's something about how the more neutral a smell, we sort of don't really like that idea either. And I'm basing this on Febreze. In the 1990s, they came up with this actually really, really clever bit of chemistry where they came up with this new chemical. It's called cyclodextrin. And essentially what it is, it's this ring-shaped molecule. What it does is it manages to trap odor, like the literal compounds inside of it, so that it's not just masking smells, it's not just covering them up with other scents that are much stronger. It's something that actually neutralizes them, so that then when they go over your olfactory bulb, they don't
bind to it.
Exactly, you literally cannot smell them.
So that's how it works.
That's how it originally worked. And so the idea is that, you spray this stuff on like pet beds and like smoking rooms, and it totally worked, right? So they did all of these experiments and they were like, look at this, is great, we found kind of the holy grail in a bottle. And then they launched it, sent loads of free samples to households who had like cats and teenage sons and like smokers and whatever, and people didn't use it because they sprayed it all around and they couldn't smell the difference. They couldn't smell their own home, they couldn't smell the stinkiness of their own home, and it just smelled like nothing, and nothing didn't feel clean. So instead they like reformulated it, added perfume to it, added like a kind of a smell that doesn't need to be there, like a smell of cleanliness, and that was when it really took off as a product.
Wow.
I mean, it's the same as like toothpaste, right? Like menthol or like minty taste. There's nothing, you could have toothpaste that like, I don't know, tasted like bacon, right? Like it doesn't matter what it smelled like or tasted like. It's just we have like linked certain flavors in our minds to this idea of cleanliness and hygiene.
Yeah, which I think, to revisit the inferiority of smell, brings us to maybe a point that I'm willing to agree with more, which is that we definitely think of it as being inferior, even though it doesn't need to be. Many studies have done this, where they've taken cherry-flavored liquid, and they've changed its color, and people will decide that it has a different flavor than it really does. If you take a cherry-flavored liquid and you dye it orange, people will say, oh, it's orange-flavored. Mm-hmm. Because they're relying on vision. They're letting that trump what they actually taste and smell. If you take that same cherry-flavored liquid and you dye it green, they'll say, oh, it's I think it's lime or kiwi maybe. They just do not allow themselves to surrender to olfaction alone. They trust their eyes, nothing else.
All right, then I accept that, our smelling senses is weaker than our other senses because we're choosing to ignore it. But I think the question is, what would happen if we did pay attention? We have like this ability there. What if we did do more sniffing? So there was this really excellent and frankly hilarious study which tried to ask that question, which was essentially like, could humans smell as well as dogs? So they got a group of 32 human subjects, human volunteers. They gave them a blindfold. They also, for some reason, gave them ear defenders. And then they tried to see if they could follow a trail left by some chocolate essence that a bit of twine had been dipped into and then dragged for 10 meters across a lawn. So these people, it's very undignified, this entire experiment. They basically were butts in the air, noses to the ground, like proper, dog sniffing territory we are. And it turns out they actually were able to do it. They actually were able to follow this trail that had gone through the grass. They even tried a 45-degree bend to see if they could work out at what point it turned the corner. And they were actually, look, they weren't as good as dogs would have been, and that's fine. But they were there sniffing, deliberately paying attention to their sniffing. They were wearing gloves as well, actually, which probably aligns with your theory of like minimized touch. They're not exactly bloodhounds, but in most cases they were able to follow the trail. And crucially, the more they practiced, the better they got at it. Maybe it is partly a question of practice, but also I think that there are some people who are going to be better at this than others. And there are some people that are known as super smellers, essentially people who are like very, very good at paying attention to their olfactory system, and also very good at detecting even small amounts of molecules that the rest of us can't really distinguish between. So there's this incredible story. Joy Milne from Perth in Scotland. And she started to notice one day, she'd always been a good smeller, right? But she noticed one day that her husband had this like very particular scent about him. And she'd be like, have you washed? Are you using a different shampoo? Are you using something different? Why do you smell like that? And he was like, nothing's changed. Like, you know, I am as I have always been. But over time, she was absolutely convinced that his smell had changed. Anyway, a little while later, her husband was diagnosed with Parkinson's. And a little while later still, she attended a conference for people who were suffering from Parkinson's and their loved ones. And as she went into the room, she was like completely floored by the fact that all of the people who had Parkinson's in there had this exact same smell that she had detected on her husband. And she said that she was like drinking cups of tea, sort of talking to people and basically going up to them and sort of like surreptitiously sniffing them just to like check if they were also someone who had that smell. Anyway, at the end of the conference, she goes up to the academic who is giving the presentation and she says, you know that there's a smell associated with Parkinson's, right? Like, you know, asking it as a question. And this medic was like, no, like, what are you talking about? This is absolute nonsense. But he was so convinced by how like totally determined she was to tell him that there was this distinctive smell that he set up an experiment for her to really test whether she actually could smell Parkinson's. So this Parkinson's researcher, a guy called Tylo Knath from the University of Edinburgh, he was like, okay, this seems really unlikely, but I'll give it a go. So he sets up an experiment where he has 12 people wearing T-shirts. I mean, it's similar to your T-shirt experiment earlier, but 6 of them were just like ordinary men, nothing interesting going on, and 6 of them had Parkinson's. And he wrapped up these T-shirts and he gave them to Joy to smell them. And she ended up getting 11 out of the 12 correctly identifying every single person who had Parkinson's. And the only one that she got wrong was that she said that somebody had Parkinson's when they didn't.
No, one false positive.
And everyone was like, this is like incredible, right? This is like absolutely amazing. Even that she'd got that many correct. But then 8 months later, that person who she had sniffed Parkinson's on ended up being diagnosed with Parkinson's.
Whoa.
She'd got the full whammy, right? Like 12 out of 12 correct. And this like incredible feat, there's just this one woman who had like detected with her nose this like combination of molecules that are concentrated in sort of the oily sebum that in the skin of people who are going to develop the disease, has like opened out this whole new area of research of like electronic noses. Essentially, we are so biased by vision, right, that most of our diagnoses that happens through like visual means, right? You know, you take a test to a lab and they look at it on a slide. You kind of you take someone into a medical scanner and you look at the x-ray or whatever it might be. You kind of go into a doctor and they take a look at your complaint. And this opens up a whole new world of like, maybe there are ways to diagnose disease that are much more around smell rather than about vision.
Wow. Super smellers. I'm more of a super stinker.
She'd be amazing as a perfumer, wouldn't she? Joy Milne. She'd be all over the place.
Well, yeah, she could do, I don't know why you would want this, but she could design a perfume to make you smell like you had all kinds of diseases.
Or even like you smell like yourself. Like imagine if there was like a Michael Stevens perfume.
Oh, I would love that. I would love a perfume that smelled like me. Yeah.
You wouldn't be able to smell it though.
Oh, okay, that's the problem, because I want to know what I smell like. But so we live our lives with this blissful ignorance where we just focus on the things that we need to be focused on. You know, they call this the centipede's dilemma. There's this great poem. A centipede was happy, quite, until a toad in fun said, "Pray, which leg moves after which?" This raised her doubts to such a pitch, she fell exhausted in the ditch, not knowing how to run. And so, as soon as someone says, wait, think about what you're doing, or explain what you're doing, you go, oh shoot, like, I don't know, it's happening without me having to be aware of every little bit. But once you make me think about it all, once the centipede is asked, what's wrong with your 34th left foot? Then it just goes, whoa, that's too much. I don't know.
So when it comes to the question of what does the inside of your nose smell like, the answer is, you'll never know, but thank goodness you won't.
Yeah, that's a good answer. It does have an odor.
You can non-consciously detect it. Other people can consciously detect it, but you will never know what it smells like. And it's good that you won't.
What a beautiful way to end this episode. If you have any questions for us, anything you want to send to our mailbag, you can email us, therestiscience@goalhanger.com.
And also don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want to hear more from us, go to therestis.com/science to sign up for our newsletter.
Until next time.
See you later.
Hey, I'm going on a tour of the United States. A good opportunity to buy a 30-word
Alex.
description, and I hope to see you there. Sam Harris, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thank you. Great to see you, Alex.
Do you think that spirituality is still a dirty word in the sort of secular community?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think it's even a dirty word in my brain, though I tried to rehabilitate it for my book on the topic. I think I burnt a fair number of words trying to take the shades of at least Abrahamic religion off of it, and Greek mysticism, etc. I mean, it has unfortunate associations, but the problem is we don't really have a good secular alternative that is that captures the depth that is there and that is rightly promised by pointing in that direction, but it doesn't immediately haul into the conversation all the spooky stuff of the New Age and all of the dogmatic stuff of organized religion.
I wonder if there is a better word. I mean, your book Waking Up is more than 10 years old now, and the first chapter is called Spirituality, and the subtitle is something like Spirituality Without Religion.
Yeah, I took a good whack at rehabilitating the word, but
yeah, right.
I don't think I was successful even for myself. Yeah.
No? That's what I was wondering, is if in the 10 years since then, I imagine at the time you raised a few eyebrows of people being like, hold on, aren't you the atheist guy, the really atheist guy? But I wondered if over the past sort of 10 years you've noticed any kind of shift, or if people in the context in which you otherwise speak still sort of look at that part of your work with a bit of suspicion.
Well, I think there are probably some people who look at that whole area of interest as being suspect, meditation and the contemplative life, and just the very notion that introspection can deliver anything of interest about the nature of the mind. I mean, there's a bias in science around that, although that I think has eroded a fair amount in recent decades. But yeah, I mean, I just noticed that I tend to shy away from the term spiritual or spirituality anyway, even though I tried to press it into service in that book. I also use contemplative, phenomenological, although no one really knows what that means when you use it. The thing that one wants to indicate here is that there is a primacy of experience, right? The first person's perspective is really the only one we can ever fully adopt, even though we can intersubjectively talk about the third person perspective, and it admits of exploration directly. I mean, you can discover more of what it's like to be you by paying attention in certain ways, or by taking certain drugs, or having unusual experiences. Going into the dark for a week. The people are doing dark retreats now, right? Which is kind of an extreme measure, but there are changes to be had to within this continuum of experience that reveal, if nothing about the cosmos at large, they reveal a lot about the type of experience that one can have, right? It's just the possibilities of experience. I mean, that really is indisputable, whatever those experiences actually mean or should mean for our intellectual lives.
As I've been getting more interested in the philosophy of mind and consciousness, I've noticed quite a reticence amongst your materialist atheist type, even to sort of take the non-reductive, strictly scientific approach seriously. And I think there's a bit of an analogy here, in that kind of person might also just be unwilling to recognize the legitimacy of knowledge through self-reflection. That is, knowledge that you get sort of inwardly rather than externally through empiricism. And yet at the same time, I think you and I would agree that, quite compellingly, there are just states of experience which are known very thoroughly through internal reflection, and also unavoidably and informatively. So given that, what do you think accounts for the reticence of so many people to take reflective knowledge seriously?
Well, I mean, there's a range of capacity in this regard, talent in this regard, which
Vaishnavite. If I'm not the mind, if I'm just bare light, what am I thinking?
This is actually the first Know Thyself podcast with our new background set.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're making some changes. So it's good to have you in the studio. Swamiji, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Andre.
I have been loving watching your talks and reading some of your books over the past few years. And the conversation today is one I'm very passionate about. And it's been very much so your life study. For people that don't know, what is Advaita Vedanta?
Well, Advaita Vedanta is a very ancient school of Indian non-dual spiritual philosophy. If you back up a little bit, the big picture kind of, if you see the study of spirituality and philosophy in India, it's like a big project you can discern from all the way back long before the Buddha. This quest to know reality about the world, reality about ourselves. It was not like our modern scientific quest. Rather, it was a quest that there is something, if we uncover that, if we realize that or find that out, then our life becomes fulfilled. So that was the quest. This quest, it went by many names: moksha, freedom, mukti, which means freedom, nirvana, kaivalya. There are multiple names and multiple traditions. Many of them were based on the Vedas, which are the root texts of Hinduism. Even those which are not directly based on the Vedas were often reactions to the Vedas, like the Jainism or Buddhism. And in the Vedas, you have these texts called the Upanishads, which are sort of the highest spiritual teachings of the Vedas. And based on these Upanishads came multiple schools of what are now called Vedanta. Vedanta just means the end of the Vedas, and not in a literal sense as the end of the book, but also in the sense of the end teachings, the final teachings or the highest teachings. But these Upanishads themselves were interpreted in a variety of ways. One of the ways, and one of the most well-known ways, is the way of Advaita Vedanta. Advaita just means non-dual. So non-dual Vedanta. It's a non-dual interpretation of the Upanishads. Based on the Upanishads, there is a text called the Brahma Sutras, and the most well-known text of Vedanta, I guess that's the one book everybody would have heard of in the world, the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita. So that is the textual basis and background of Advaita Vedanta, and it has continued down from that time onwards till today. It's a living tradition. There are millions who follow it, who study it, who practice it. There are thousands and thousands of monks also. Like myself, I'm one of them, who have made it their lifelong pursuit to study, practice, live by, and manifest this philosophy. So it's a living tradition. It has been for millennia. Its central teaching is radical. You are that. Tattvamasi in Sanskrit. One beautiful thing about Vedanta also is an ocean of literature. But it can be expressed, the central teaching of Vedanta can be expressed very elegantly in half a verse. So there is a Sanskrit saying, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya Jiva Brahmaiva Napara, which means Brahman alone is real. The world is an appearance. And you are that ultimate reality. The sentient being is that ultimate reality. You can compress it further into a short sentence. You are that. Tattvam Asi. That means you are that ultimate reality. That means if we were to really inquire and find out who or what we are, if we knew ourselves, we would discover something amazing. That's the promise. Something, the greatest secret of all. In fact, the point of it all, rather. Other sentences are there in the Upanishads. Aham Brahmasmi. I am Brahman. I am the ultimate reality. Prajnanam Brahma. Consciousness is the ultimate reality. I am Atma Brahma. This very self is the ultimate reality of the universe. You can compress it further into single words. Just the word Brahman. Not the Brahmin, which is a caste in Hinduism. Brahman literally means the vast, the limitless. Sometimes in the Upanishads, it's just called Tat, that. The word Purnam, which means complete or whole or limitless. Anantam, which means limitless. You can make it even shorter. You can just say Om, and if you unpack that the monosyllable Om, you would get all of Vedanta. You can make it even shorter, just silence. They say the Vedanta can be expressed as silence.
So, what is the promise that this way of knowing, this end of knowledge or culmination of knowledge is providing? In essence, what is Jivan Mukti, and what can, by virtue of listening to this podcast, can our audience, community, listeners hopefully get a bit of a glimpse into of that same goal or promise there?
That's a good question, and the promise is really, really big. It doesn't get any bigger than this. I can put it in two ways. One is the traditional way it is put in India, not just for Advaita Vedanta, but for all these paths, all these ancient paths. It's freedom from the cycle of birth and death. That's how life is understood in India, and that's not peculiar to one school. It's sort of axiomatic across all schools, except the materialists who say everything ends at death. But other than that, all other schools, Advaita Vedanta, the other schools of Vedanta, the Shaiva schools, the Shakta schools, the Buddhists, the Jains, the Sikhs, every shade of religion and philosophy in India, they've sort of axiomatically said that the description of life is this cycle of birth and death. This is not our first time here and won't be our last. We have been here many times. We have been born many times and we have died many times. And that's not good news, because we have been repeating this cycle of birth and death, and it's a limited existence. It's full of suffering and limitation and sorrow and struggle. And a freedom from this cycle is possible. And so that's seen as the ultimate goal. So now that's the way it is traditionally put. In Advaita Vedanta, the result is moksha, freedom from the cycle of birth and death. But if you want to put it in less theological terms, if you will, something much more universally acceptable. When I came here to the West, they warned me that this talk about the cycle of birth and death doesn't go down so easily in the West, in America especially, as it does in India, because it's sort of axiomatic in India. But suppose one doesn't have those presuppositions. What can we put something in a form that is universally acceptable to everybody is the attainment of deep, lasting happiness or bliss, if you will, and overcoming of suffering. A deep solution to the problem of suffering, the existential problem of human life. So basically it amounts to the same thing: overcoming the cycle of, transcending the cycle of birth and death, and overcoming suffering. Basically it's the same thing. This is also the language in which the other schools are also put. Buddhism also, the Buddha said life is suffering, and there is a possibility of freedom from this suffering, and that's what he called nirvana. Exactly in the same way, Advaita Vedanta says deep, lasting fulfillment is possible. The Sanskrit word ananda, bliss is possible, and freedom from suffering is possible. And that's what it aims to deliver. This is the promise. And this is sort of universally acceptable. This is the principle on which the United States was founded, the Declaration of Independence, the pursuit of happiness and of liberty and the right to life. So life, liberty, and happiness, if you put it in Vedantic terms, the pursuit of happiness is ananda, bliss. The pursuit of life would be eternal existence. That means freedom from death, literally. And freedom, liberty. I don't know if the founding fathers meant it in a Vedantic sense, but they hit upon something very profound, very deep. Now, Vedanta also says that this realization is possible. It's not a post-mortem spirituality that you have to wait after death. After death, you get to see God, or after death, you get to go to heaven. Quite possible, and I do believe that's possible. But the really important promise is here and now, in this life. So that's the word you refer to, Jivan Mukti. The Sanskrit word Jivan Mukti means free while living in this body. So that's what the Advaita Vedantin aims at. That is not common to all the schools, because some of the schools would say that you really cannot be perfect in this life. You have to die and go to a higher state of existence. All that might be fine, but Advaita Vedanta, it is that way. It is very, very practical. It says that what is there must be here too. There's a saying: if you have it here, you have it there. If you don't have it here, you won't have it there. So the enlightenment which you get here will serve you there. There means maybe after death or in heaven or wherever it is. So realization of this and living it in this life Swami Vivekananda, he put it beautifully. He said, basically spirituality is the manifestation of the divinity already within us. So the divinity already within us, our real nature, to know it, and not just to know it, but to live it, to manifest it. He put it in other words. He said, my mission in life can be put in a few words. Vivekananda. He says, it is to teach unto humanity their inner divinity and how to make it manifest in every movement of life. It's in our thought, in our emotion, in our speech, in our actions. So that is the promise.
And Advaita Vedanta as a path within what you might say is the umbrella of Jnana Yoga as a vehicle towards self-realization. We all have our own individual constitution and maybe resonate towards specific paths, which I'm sure we could, elaborate on. But there's something that has resonated so deeply within me, the path of Jnana Yoga, to be able to experientially verify claims and in our real-time experience, and especially as an intellectually and analytically dominant society and culture, I think is a really beautiful pathway and opening of the door for people to start to examine the nature of self and reality. And you do that, and you help guide people in that as well, so beautifully. And so when you think about the epistemic orientation of Jnana Yoga, of the way in which we come to know, could you expand about that?
Yes, so I'll just touch upon this. You just mentioned our constitutions differ. You hit upon something very deep there. One reason why a variety of paths is desirable, well, there are two aspects to this. One is the nature of that ultimate reality. It could be, in fact, we hold that the nature of that ultimate reality which we are seeking, our ultimate reality and the reality of this universe, this is what Vedanta is inquiring, and Vedanta's teaching is that they are the two. The two are the same. Our ultimate reality, what we truly are, and what this universe truly is one and the same thing. In Vedantic language, it's Atman is equal to Brahman. Atman means our inner self. Brahman is the reality of this universe. It's the same reality. So one thing is that the ultimate reality is so capacious that you can approach it in different ways. You can have different theologies, you can have different philosophies, and all would be right. It's a human limitation that we think if this is right, everything else has to be wrong. This is something really beautiful about ancient India, and till today it's part of Indian culture, that there can be multiplicity of viewpoints, and it doesn't mean that one is right and everything else is wrong. They could all be right. In fact, we hold that they are all right. Also, that's from the perspective of the ultimate reality. But from our perspective, as you said, we are diverse. Human beings are of many kinds. The internal constitution. So it makes sense to have multiple pathways. Some more emotion-related, heart-related. Some more intellect-related. Some more action-oriented. Vivekananda, in fact, was of the opinion that you should have all of them in your spiritual life. A balanced spiritual life should be intellectual, should be devotional, should be meditative, and should be action-oriented also. All of them can be and should be part of a wholesome spiritual life. All right, but now to your question about the epistemology of Jnana Yoga. Yes, you're right. It's extreme. I find it extremely attractive, and I see large numbers of people are drawn to that side of Jnana Yoga. Let's put it this way. All these paths work, but let's put it under three broad paradigms. I'm just trying to bring out the uniqueness of Jnana Yoga, what makes it so special. One path of spirituality is something that is very common, immediately understood. You might call it the devotional path. There's a Sanskrit word for it, bhakti, the love of God or love of devotion. So if you see temples, churches, mosques, they're all devotional paths. Here we are told that there is an ultimate reality, call it God or Vishnu or Shiva or Father in Heaven or Jehovah or Allah. And how do we know that? If you ask an epistemic question, the answer would be, you know it by tradition, by faith, and because your masters have told you so, because your religion tells you so, your holy book tells you so, the testimony of the saints, and so on. So you know it that way. It's primarily a path of faith. And the way it is practiced is also, if you look closely, it is love, devotion, prayer, music, surrender, adoration. It's a worship of the other, the divine as the other, God. The problem with it's a beautiful path, and it's a genuine path. It has produced mystics and genuinely enlightened people across the centuries, and it's the most common path which is what you get when you come to religion, first of all. But if you want to play the devil's advocate, especially in this day and age, we've never had so many atheists or agnostics ever in the history of humanity as we have today.
I think we can call Operation Restore the Concrete Plant a success. My naming of operations, not so much. Anywho, it's all thanks to you as usual. I mean that. I've sent you some concrete bridge designs. I'm sure they'll be helpful. Of course, we have a long road ahead bringing the rest of the region back to shape, but we're off to a good start.
I wanted nothing more than to preserve the love that we had between us. We were in a stalemate.
Yeah.
It was like stagnant.
Why was it stagnant?
That was a really tough time for me. I felt really alone. And it would have been a miracle for me to, got from the bedroom down to the fridge without breaking down.
Ultimately, I think one of the biggest points in accepting the separation of a relationship is when you begin to see your past partner with somebody else.
We're still best friends. On the other side of 2.5 years of being in a romantic partnership, I celebrate your joy, even if it doesn't involve me.
These romantic relationships that we cultivate in our life, they are some of the biggest catalysts for us to know ourselves. So,
and I believe that this relationship with you has been one of the greatest teachers in my life up until this point of what true love is.
Vaishnavite, Shaktas, Shaiva.
What was that ship? Who was on it? Where was it going? Why was it going there? all of these questions will be answered, promised Prometheus in its advertising. And that is simply because the original script for the film answered those questions. But somewhere along the line, our god, if you will, Ridley Scott, who created the alien in his original movie,
The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little. But someday the piecing together of dissociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and of our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. Theosophists have guessed at the awesome grandeur of the cosmic cycle wherein our world and the human race form transient incidents. They have hinted at strange survival in terms which would freeze the blood if not masked by a bland optimism. But it is not from them that there came the single glimpse of forbidden eons which chills me when I think of it and maddens me when I dream of it. That glimpse, like all dread glimpses of truth, flashed out from an accidental piecing together of separated things, in this case an old newspaper item and the notes of a dead professor. I hope that no one else will accomplish this piecing out. Certainly if I live, I shall never knowingly supply a link in so hideous a chain. I think that the professor, too, intended to keep silent regarding the part he knew, and that he would have destroyed his notes had not sudden death seized him. My knowledge of the thing began in the winter of 1926-7 with the death of my great-uncle, George Gammell Angel, Professor Emeritus of Semitic Languages in Brown University, Providence, Rhode Island. Professor Angel was widely known as an authority on ancient inscriptions and had frequently been resorted to by the heads of prominent museums, so that his passing at the age of 92 may be recalled by many. Locally, interest was intensified by the obscurity of the cause of death. The professor had been stricken whilst returning from the Newport boat, falling suddenly, as witnesses said, after having been jostled by a nautical-looking Negro who had come from one of the queer dark courts on the precipitous hillside, which formed a shortcut from the waterfront to the deceased's home in William Street. Physicians were unable to find any visible disorder, but concluded after perplexed debate that some obscure lesion of the heart, induced by the brisk ascent of so steep a hill by so elderly a man, was responsible for the end. At the time, I saw no reason to dissent from this dictum, but latterly I am inclined to wonder, and more than wonder. As my great-uncle's heir and executor, for he died a childless widower, I was expected to go over his papers with some thoroughness, and for that purpose moved his entire set of files and boxes to my quarters in Boston. Much of the material which I correlated will be later published by the American Archaeological Society. But there was one box which I found exceedingly puzzling, and which I felt much averse from showing to other eyes. It had been locked, and I did not find the key till it occurred to me to examine the personal ring which the professor carried always in his pocket. Then indeed I succeeded in opening it, but when I did so, seemed only to be confronted by a greater and more closely locked barrier. For what could be the meaning of the queer clay, bas-relief, and the disjointed jottings, ramblings, and cuttings which I found? Had my uncle, in his latter years, become credulous of the most superficial impostures? I resolved to search out the eccentric sculptor responsible for this apparent disturbance of an old man's peace of mind. The bas-relief was a rough rectangle, less than an inch thick, and about 5 by 6 inches in area, obviously of modern origin. Its designs, however, were far from modern in atmosphere and suggestion. For, although the vagaries of Cubism and Futurism are many and wild, they do not often reproduce that cryptic regularity which lurks in prehistoric writing. And writing of some kind, the bulk of these designs certainly seemed to be. Though my memory, despite much familiarity with the papers and collections of my uncle, failed in any way to identify this particular species, or even hint at its remotest affiliations. Above these apparent hieroglyphics was a figure of evidently pictorial intent, though its impressionistic execution forbade a very clear idea of its nature. It seemed to be a sort of monster, or symbol representing a monster, of a form which only a diseased fancy could conceive. If I say that my somewhat extravagant imagination yielded simultaneous pictures of an octopus, a dragon, and a human caricature, I shall not be unfaithful to the spirit of the thing. A pulpy, tentacled head surmounted a grotesque and scaly body with rudimentary wings. But it was the general outline of the whole which made it most shockingly frightful. Behind the figure was a vague suggestion of a cyclopean architectural background. The writing accompanying this oddity was, aside from a stack of press cuttings, in Professor Angel's most recent hand, and made no pretension to literary style. What seemed to be the main document was headed Cthulhu Cult, in characters painstakingly printed to avoid the erroneous reading of a word so unheard of. This manuscript was divided into two sections, the first of which was headed 1925, Dream and Dream Work of H.A. Wilcox, 7 Thomas Street, Providence, Rhode Island. And the second, Narrative of Inspector John R. Legrasse, 121 Bienville Street, New Orleans, Louisiana, at 1908 AAS meeting. Notes on same, and Professor Webb's account. The other manuscript papers were all brief notes, some of them accounts of the queer dreams of different persons, some of them citations from theosophical books and magazines, notably W. Scott Eliot's Atlantis and the Lost Lemuria. And the rest, comments on long-surviving secret societies and hidden cults, with references to passages in such mythological and anthropological source books as Fraser's Golden Bough and Miss Murray's Witch Cult in Western Europe. The cuttings largely alluded to outre mental illness and outbreaks of brute folly or mania in the spring of 1925. The first half of the principal manuscript told a very peculiar tale. It appears that on 1st March 1925, a thin, dark young man of neurotic and excited aspect had called upon Professor Angel, bearing the singular clay bas-relief, which was then exceedingly damp and fresh. His card bore the name of Henry Anthony Wilcox, and my uncle had recognized him as the youngest son of an excellent family, slightly known to him, who had latterly been studying sculpture at the Rhode Island School of Design, and living alone at the Fleur-de-Lis building, near that institution. Wilcox was a precocious youth of known genius, but great eccentricity, and had from childhood excited attention through the strange stories and odd dreams he was in the habit of relating. He called himself psychically hypersensitive, but the staid folk of the ancient commercial city dismissed him as merely queer. Never mingling much with his kind, he had dropped gradually from social visibility, and was now known only to a small group of aesthetes from other towns. Even the Providence Art Club, anxious to preserve its conservatism, had found him quite hopeless. On the occasion of the visit, ran the professor's manuscript, the sculptor abruptly asked for the benefit of his host's archaeological knowledge in identifying the hieroglyphics on the bas-relief. He spoke in a dreamy, stilted manner, which suggested pose and alienated sympathy, and my uncle showed some sharpness in replying, for the conspicuous freshness of the tablet implied kinship with anything but archaeology. Young Wilcox's rejoinder, which impressed my uncle enough to make him recall and record it verbatim, was of a fantastically poetic cast, which must have typified his whole conversation. and which I have since found highly characteristic of him. He said, "It is new indeed, for I made it last night in a dream of strange cities, and dreams are older than brooding Tyre, or the contemplative Sphinx, or garden-girded Babylon." It was then that he began that rambling tale which suddenly played upon a sleeping memory and won the fevered interest of my uncle. There had been a slight earthquake tremor the night before, the most considerable felt in New England for some years, and Wilcox's imaginations had been keenly affected. Upon retiring, he had had an unprecedented dream of great cyclopean cities of Titan blocks and sky-flung monoliths, all dripping with green ooze and sinister with latent horror. Hieroglyphics had covered the walls and pillars, and from some undetermined point below had come a voice that was not a voice. A chaotic sensation which only fancy could transmute into sound, but which he attempted to render by the almost unpronounceable jumble of letters, Cthulhu Tah. This verbal jumble was the key to the recollection which excited and disturbed Professor Angel. He questioned the sculptor with scientific minuteness and studied with almost frantic intensity the bas-relief on which the youth had found himself working, chilled and clad only in his nightclothes, when waking had stolen bewilderingly over him. My uncle blamed his old age, Wilcox afterwards said, for his slowness in recognizing both hieroglyphics and pictorial design. Many of his questions seemed highly out of place to his visitor, especially those which tried to connect the latter with strange cults or societies. And Wilcox could not understand the repeated promises of silence which he was offered in exchange for an admission of membership in some widespread mystical or paganly religious body. When Professor Angel became convinced that the sculptor was indeed ignorant of any cult or system of cryptic lore, he besieged his visitor with demands for future reports of dreams. This bore regular fruit, for after the first interview, the manuscript records daily calls of the young man, during which he related startling fragments of nocturnal imagery whose burden was always some terrible cyclopean vista of dark and dripping stone, with a subterrene voice or intelligence shouting monotonously in enigmatical sense impacts, uninscribable save as gibberish. The two sounds most frequently repeated are those rendered by the letters Cthulhu and Willi. On 23rd March, the manuscript continued, Wilcox failed to appear, and inquiries at his quarters revealed that he had been stricken with an obscure sort of fever and taken to the home of his family in Waterman Street. He had cried out in the night, arousing several other artists in the building, and had manifested since then only alternations of unconsciousness and delirium. My uncle at once telephoned the family, and from that time forward kept close watch of the case, calling often at the Thayer Street office of Dr. Toby, whom he learned to be in charge. The youth's febrile mind, apparently, was dwelling on strange things, and the doctor shuddered now and then as he spoke of them. They included not only a repetition of what he had formerly dreamed, but touched wildly on a gigantic thing, miles high, which walked or lumbered about. He at no time fully described this object, but occasional frantic words, as repeated by Dr. Toby, convinced the professor that it must be identical with the nameless monstrosity he had sought to depict in his dream sculpture. Reference to this object, the doctor added, was invariably a prelude to the young man's subsidence into lethargy. His temperature, oddly enough, was not greatly above normal, but the whole condition was otherwise such as to suggest true fever rather than mental disorder. On 2nd April at about 3 p.m., every trace of Wilcox's malady suddenly ceased. He sat upright in bed, astonished to find himself at home, and completely ignorant of what had happened in dream or reality since the night of 22nd March. Pronounced well by his physician, he returned to his quarters in 3 days. But to Professor Angel, he was of no further assistance. All traces of strange dreaming had vanished with his recovery, and my uncle kept no record of his night thoughts after a week of pointless and irrelevant accounts of thoroughly usual visions. Here the first part of the manuscript ended, but references to certain of the scattered notes gave me much material for thought. So much, in fact, that only the ingrained skepticism then forming my philosophy can account for my continued distrust of the artist. The notes in question were those descriptive of the dreams of various persons covering the same period as that in which young Wilcox had had his strange visitations. My uncle, it seems, had quickly instituted a prodigiously far-flung body of inquiries amongst nearly all the friends whom he could question without impertinence, asking for nightly reports of their dreams and the dates of any notable visions for some time past. The reception of his request seems to have been varied, but he must at the very least have received more responses than any ordinary man could have handled without a secretary. This original correspondence was not preserved, but his notes formed a thorough and really significant digest. Average people in society and business, New England's traditional salt of the earth, gave an almost completely negative result, though scattered cases of uneasy but formless nocturnal impressions appear here and there, always between 23rd March and 2nd April, the period of young Wilcox's delirium. Scientific men were little more affected, though 4 cases of vague description suggest fugitive glimpses of strange landscapes, and in one case there is mentioned a dread of something abnormal. It was from the artists and poets that the pertinent answers came, and I know that panic would have broken loose had they been able to compare notes. As it was, lacking their original letters, I half suspected the compiler of having asked leading questions, or of having edited the correspondence in corroboration of what he had latently resolved to see. That is why I continued to feel
Truly, nothing. When I was growing up, I was afraid of a lot of things. I wouldn't call it a specific fear, more just that I was extra sensitive to potentially scary imagery in situations. Obviously, a lot of kids have a lower fear threshold, but mine was lower than most. My parents had pretty strict rulings on most forms of entertainment when I was younger. I wasn't allowed to play games with any kind of real violence until I graduated middle school. I wasn't allowed to watch R-rated movies until a similar time, same for the TV show equivalents. I wasn't allowed to use websites like Tumblr or YouTube to find personalized and/or edgy content. Even my music app on my iPod had a restriction that wouldn't allow me to hear explicit songs. Point is, I wasn't exposed to a lot of ideas when I was younger. This had 2 results. First is that I was a really weird kid. Because I couldn't be on social media or YouTube, I was never caught up with the memes or the slang of the times. And as a fairly socially anxious person, I hated having conversations with kids who were allowed to have more fun, because I had no frame of reference for what they were saying. Kids, at least in my experience, are incredibly referential creatures. If you haven't seen the thing they're talking about, the conversation dies in the water. It always felt like that terrible situation where you're in a room that's way too loud and someone asks you something and you can't hear them, but for some reason you've decided you don't want to make them repeat themselves, so you just go, haha, yeah, and sprint off in the other direction. The second result, really the foundation of this essay, is that I had no stomach for visual horror, despite an ironic fascination with the subject. It was a nasty relationship. During the light of day, I could handle a lot. What few scary shows I was allowed to watch, I ate up. Goosebumps and The Haunting Hour were some of my favorites. I destroyed horror books like it was nothing, whatever I could get my hands on. Edgar Allan Poe, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, Stephen King, even crummy horror movie tie-ins. I specifically remember this one Friday the 13th book that took place in an amusement park. A wax figure of Jason comes to life for some reason and kills everyone. Classic slasher antics. Probably not that well written in retrospect, but I had never seen a slasher movie. I couldn't sleep for days after reading that one, which was always the case. The night made everything which had seemed fun and exhilarating in the light of day terrifying and oppressive. I had not struck a healthy balance yet. The reason I mention my initial weakness to horror is that now, if you've watched my content or spoken to me before, you'll probably know, I'm a huge fan of horror, including horror movies, so clearly there was a transitionary period where I had to suffer through an intense fear in an attempt to enjoy horror in its most popular form. I feel like most people
The ones who walk away from Omelas. So the story is basically a thought experiment. The narrator asks you to imagine a city called Omelas. It's not utopia in a futuristic sense, it's just a place where people are genuinely happy. There's music and festivals and pleasure, like ordinary lives that actually feel good. Omelas is a perfect city. Everyone's happy. There's no war, no poverty, and people live joyful lives. The narrator even lets you imagine it however you want, because the details don't matter. The narrator keeps interrupting and saying, basically, if you don't like this version, imagine another one. What matters is that the happiness is real. But then you're told the condition. Somewhere in Omelas there's a small locked room. Inside it there's a child. The child is malnourished, neglected, and kept in darkness, and never shown kindness. The door is locked, and the child is never allowed to leave. Everyone in Omelas eventually learns about this child, and they're told the rule very clearly. The happiness of the entire city depends on that child's suffering. If the child is ever freed or even shown kindness, the joy of Omelas would disappear. At first, people are horrified when they learn this. Some cry, some feel sick, some try to justify it.
If you really question your life, one thing becomes clear. Most of it is suffering, hoping for just some moments of happiness. And yet, despite the endless torment, you continue living, driven by something that is beyond logic, the insatiable will to live. For Arthur Schopenhauer, this will was the fundamental force behind all existence. In The World as Will and Representation, he described it as a blind, relentless drive that compels every living being to survive, reproduce, and persist. It isn't rational, conscious, or purposeful. It simply is. Schopenhauer wrote, "Life is assured to the will to live. Therefore, it clings to it, even in the most miserable conditions." But the will is not a source of joy. It is the root of suffering. Fulfill one desire, and another takes its place. Escape one pain, and a new one emerges. Schopenhauer argued that pleasure is fleeting, while suffering is constant. He wrote, "All satisfaction is only negative, the removal of a desire and pain." This struggle is universal. In nature, life devours life in a cycle of survival. In human existence, ambition often leads to emptiness. Unlike animals, we reflect on our suffering, yet remain trapped by the will, amplifying our own misery. Hell is other people. Hell isn't where you go, it's who you're with. Jean-Paul Sartre's idea, hell is other people, reveals a profound truth about human relationships. For Sartre, the essence of torment lies in being trapped under the gaze of others. Human existence is shaped by how we are seen and judged, forcing us to view ourselves through their perceptions rather than as we truly are. Picture yourself standing in front of a funhouse mirror that distorts your reflection. No matter how you adjust or try to explain what you really look like, the reflection defines you in the eyes of everyone watching. Sartre argued that this is what it feels like to exist in the presence of others. Every glance, every judgment imposes a version of you that may not align with your true self. This dynamic isn't just an occasional discomfort, it's a fundamental part of human existence. The need for validation locks us in a cycle where we crave recognition, even though it limits our authenticity. Sartre believed that the gaze of others turns us into objects, stripping away the freedom to define ourselves independently. Human relationships, even at their best, carry this inherent tension. The mere presence of others creates an invisible web of expectations and judgments, trapping us in roles we never fully choose. For Sartre, this unresolvable conflict defines the human condition, a constant pull between the desire to be seen and the inevitable loss of freedom that comes with it. Sadian nihilism. Morality is just an illusion. Nature doesn't care if you are good or evil, just or cruel. This is the stark foundation of Sadian nihilism, a philosophy rooted in the provocative works of the Marquis de Sade, whose ideas challenge the very essence of morality itself. At its core, Sadean nihilism denies the existence of universal moral truths. De Sade argued that concepts like virtue and justice are human inventions imposed on an indifferent and amoral natural world. In his novel Justine, he declares, "Nature has created us all solely to torment one another." For de Sade, nature is driven purely by survival and desire, indifferent to human constructs of right and wrong. De Sade's view of humanity reflects this brutal indifference. He saw people as creatures governed by raw impulses rather than reason or ethics. If morality is nothing more than a human fabrication, he concluded, there is no obligation to adhere to its rules. In The Philosophy in the Bedroom, he claimed that true freedom lies in embracing natural desires, no matter how transgressive or destructive. Dysteleological suffering. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. This observation from Richard Dawkins captures the essence of dysteleological suffering, the belief that pain exists without meaning, purpose, or redemption. Nature is indifferent to suffering. Predators hunt, prey suffers, and parasites thrive, all as a consequence of survival, not morality or design. Suffering in this view isn't a test or lesson, it's simply a byproduct of life's relentless processes. There's no cosmic plan, no higher goal to explain the pain that pervades existence. The term dysteleology combines the Greek telos, meaning end or purpose, with dys, implying something flawed or misaligned. It rejects comforting narratives that suffering serves a greater good, revealing a world driven by chaos and competition rather than divine order. Objection. Why does a rotting corpse horrify us so deeply? Why do we recoil from things that blur the boundaries between human and inhuman? These reactions stem from objection, a concept explored by Julia Kristeva in her book Powers of Horror. Objection isn't just fear or disgust, it's the psychological unease we feel when something disrupts the boundaries that define our sense of self. Kristeva explains that human identity relies on clear distinctions, self and other, life and death, clean and unclean. The abject is anything that breaks these boundaries, forcing us to confront what we've repressed or excluded. Bodily fluids like blood or vomit unsettle us because they blur the line between inside and outside, reminding us of our physicality, vulnerability, and mortality. A corpse, once alive and now decaying, occupies a space between human and other. It confronts us with the reality of death, a reality we often work hard to ignore. God is dead. Friedrich Nietzsche's words, God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him, are among the most provocative in philosophy. Written in his 1882 work, The Gay Science, this wasn't a declaration, but a dire warning. Nietzsche wasn't speaking of a literal deity's death, but the collapse of the belief systems that had guided Western civilization for centuries. At the core of this idea is the impact of the Enlightenment, science, and secularization. Faith in God was replaced by faith in reason and progress, liberating humanity from religious dogma. But Nietzsche saw this as a double-edged sword. The moral framework provided by religion was gone, leaving humanity untethered, drifting in a world without absolute meaning or values. He illustrated this existential crisis through his parable of the madman. In it, a man runs into a marketplace declaring that God is dead and we are his murderers. The crowd laughs, not grasping the weight of his words. The madman laments, "What did we do when we unchained this earth from its sun? Are we not plunging continually? Is there still any up or down? Without God, humanity loses its foundation, risking a descent into nihilism, the belief that life is meaningless." Being and nothingness. Existence precedes essence. Jean-Paul Sartre's foundational statement in Being and Nothingness captures the core of his existentialist philosophy. Humans are not born with a predetermined nature or purpose. Instead, we create our essence through actions and choices. Sartre argues that we are defined not by what we are, but by what we do. Sartre distinguishes between two modes of being in itself and being for itself. Being in itself refers to inanimate objects that simply exist, fixed, unchanging, and unaware. A chair or a rock, for example, has no capacity for self-reflection or transformation. Being for itself, by contrast, describes human consciousness. Unlike objects, humans exist as incomplete and constantly changing, defined by their ability to reflect, choose, and imagine possibilities. Central to Sartre's existentialist philosophy, humans are not born with a predetermined nature or purpose. Instead, we create our essence through actions and choices. Sartre argues that we are defined not by what we are, but by what we do. Sartre distinguishes between two modes of being in itself and being for itself. Being in itself refers to inanimate objects that simply exist, fixed, unchanging, and unaware. A chair or a rock, for example, has no capacity for self-reflection or transformation. Being for itself, by contrast, describes human consciousness. Unlike objects, humans exist as incomplete and constantly changing, defined by their ability to reflect, choose, and imagine possibilities. Central to Sartre's philosophy is the concept of nothingness. Consciousness introduces a gap, nothingness, between ourselves and the world. This gap allows humans to envision what could be and act freely. However, this freedom comes with an immense burden, the responsibility to shape our lives and humanity through our choices. Eternal torment of samsara. Life is suffering, not just in its hardest moments, but in its very nature. This is the heart of samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth in Buddhism.
Starts.
Ocean circulation patterns.
form a persistent component of the earth.
To shape our lives and humanity through our choices. Eternal torment of samsara. Life is suffering, not just in its hardest.
Picture a small room in 19th century Russia, cold, barely lit. A man sits at a wooden desk, writing through the night. His name is Fyodor Dostoevsky, and what he is writing will change how the world understands the human mind. Not through theories, not through diagnosis, through characters who think too much, who suffer too deeply, who cannot escape their own conscience.
Before we descend into 5,000 years of darkness, I need you to understand something. What you're about to hear is not theology. This is not a sermon. This is not an attempt to convince you that hell exists or doesn't exist, that any religion is right or wrong. This is history. Documented, verified, sourced history of how humans across every culture and every century have imagined the place where souls go to suffer. We will trace hell from its oldest origins in ancient Mesopotamia, through Egyptian underworlds, Greek Hades, the development of the Christian Inferno, Islamic Jahannam, Buddhist and Hindu Naraka, Dante's 9 circles, medieval art and torture, Victorian spiritualist claims of visiting hell, and finally modern psychological interpretations. Every claim I make will be sourced, every translation verified, every artistic depiction traced to its origin. This is not speculation. This is what humans believed, what they wrote, what they painted, and how those beliefs shaped civilization. If you value deeply research content that examines religion and mythology through a historical lens rather than a faith lens, that presents pure documented scholarship without repetition or padding, then subscribe. Turn on notifications and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Because hell is universal. Every culture invented it. Every civilization needed it. And understanding why tells us more about humanity than perhaps any other concept we've created. Now settle in. What follows is comprehensive. We begin not with fire and brimstone, but with the oldest written words about the land of the dead. Words carved in clay 4,000 years ago in a language most people have never heard. Words that would shape every conception of hell that followed. Let us descend. Chapter 1. The Oldest Darkness, Mesopotamia. The concept of hell is comprehensive. We begin not with fire and brimstone, but with the oldest written words about the land of the dead. Words carved in clay 4,000 years ago in a language most people have never heard. Words that would shape every conception of hell that followed. Let us descend. Chapter 1. The Oldest Darkness, Mesopotamia.
Left of the crest.
The concept of hell does not begin with Christianity. It does not begin with any religion most people practice today. It begins in Sumer, in Mesopotamia, in what is now Iraq, approximately 3,000 years before the Common Era. And it begins not with punishment for sin, but with something simpler and more terrifying, the realization that everyone, good, evil, king, slave, goes to the same dark place when they die. The Sumerians called this place Kur, sometimes Irkalla. It was not a place of judgment, it was simply the land of the dead. And according to the oldest texts we possess, it was a house of darkness where the dead ate dust and clay. Our earliest detailed description comes from a text modern scholars call The Descent of Inanna, written in cuneiform on clay tablets approximately 2100 BCE. But the story itself is certainly older, passed through oral tradition for generations before anyone wrote it down. Inanna was the Sumerian goddess of love, war, and fertility. And in this epic, she decides to descend into the underworld, ruled by her sister, Ereshkigal. The poem describes the journey. To reach Kur, Inanna must pass through 7 gates. At each gate, the guardian demands she remove one item: her crown, her necklace, her breastplate, her garments, until she arrives naked and powerless before Ereshkigal's throne. This stripping is not arbitrary. It represents the absolute equality of death. In the underworld, status means nothing. Power means nothing. Even a goddess arrives as nothing. Ereshkigal kills Inanna. The goddess's corpse hangs on a hook for 3 days before other gods negotiate her release. But there is a price. Someone must take her place. Her husband Dumuzi is chosen. He will spend half the year in Kur, alternating with his sister. This myth explains the seasons. When Dumuzi is below, vegetation dies. When he returns, spring comes. But more importantly, it establishes a principle that will echo through every hell tradition that follows. The underworld demands balance. Life requires death. Escape requires substitution. What was Kur like for ordinary dead? Another text, the Epic of Gilgamesh, provides description. This epic, composed around 2100 BCE, but describing events set centuries earlier, includes a scene where the hero Gilgamesh speaks with the spirit of his dead companion Enkidu. Enkidu describes the underworld, the house where the dwellers are without light, where dust is their sustenance and clay their food. They are clothed like birds with feathers. They see no light and dwell in darkness. This is not torture. This is negation. The Mesopotamian underworld is absence. Absence of light, of proper food, of movement, of life. The dead exist in a state that is not quite existence. They are shades, shadows of what they were, dwelling in eternal gloom, eating dust. But the Mesopotamians did believe in different fates for different dead. The properly buried, with correct rituals performed, existed more comfortably than those who died violently or remained unburied. Women who died in childbirth, warriors who died in battle, those who drowned. Each had specific conditions in the afterlife, though none were pleasant. The worst fate was to be forgotten. If no one poured libations, left food offerings, or spoke your name, you faded even from the underworld's dim existence. By the time we reached the Babylonian period, around 1800 BCE, the concept had evolved slightly. The descent of Ishtar, the Babylonian version of Inanna's story, adds more detail about the underworld structure. Ishtar must pass through 7 gates, each guarded. At each gate, she loses something, arriving powerless. The text describes the underworld as the land of no return, the house of darkness, where those who enter are deprived of light. But Babylonian texts introduce something new, the concept of divine judgment in the underworld. The gods Shamash and Sin were believed to judge the dead, though what exactly they judged and what punishments they assigned remains unclear in surviving texts. This is the seed, just the seed, of the idea that the afterlife involves judgment of earthly behavior. The Akkadian poem of the righteous sufferer, sometimes called the Babylonian Job, written around 1400 BCE, describes a man's nightmare vision of being dragged to the underworld prematurely. He sees the house whose entrance has no exit, where the dead are clothed in feather garments like birds. This suggests that even in life, Mesopotamians feared premature death and burial more than they feared punishment after death. What's crucial to understand is that the Mesopotamian underworld was not hell as later traditions conceived it. It was not primarily about punishment. It was about the inevitability and equality of death. Kings and slaves ended in the same dark house. Heroes and cowards ate the same dust. The horror was not torture, but meaninglessness, existence without joy, without purpose, without light, forever. This Mesopotamian vision would profoundly influence every culture that followed. When the Hebrews were exiled to Babylon in 586 BCE, they encountered these traditions. When the Persians conquered Mesopotamia, they absorbed these ideas. When the Greeks traded with Near Eastern cultures, these concepts filtered westward. The underworld as dark house, as place of shades, as realm requiring passage through gates. These motifs appear again and again in later traditions because they originated here, in Sumer, 4,000 years ago. The Mesopotamian contribution to hell is this. They established that death was a place, not just an event. That the dead continued in some form. That the afterlife was dark, joyless, and inescapable. They created the template. Every culture that followed would elaborate on this template, adding judgment, adding punishment, adding hope of escape or damnation. But the foundation, the house of darkness where all the dead go, was laid in ancient Sumer, carved in cuneiform on clay tablets that have survived millennia, to tell us how the older civilizations understood what awaits us all. Chapter 2, The Weighing of the Heart, Egypt. While Mesopotamia imagined the afterlife as universal darkness, Egypt created something far more complex. The Egyptian underworld, called Duat, was not simply a destination, but a journey. A dangerous, intricate, terrifying journey that every soul must undertake, filled with challenges, monsters, and most significantly, judgment. Our primary source for understanding Egyptian afterlife beliefs is the collection of texts modern scholars call the Book of the Dead. This is a misleading title. The Egyptian name was the Book of Coming Forth by Day, or Spells for Going Forth by Day. It was not a single book, but a collection of approximately 200 spells, prayers, and instructions meant to guide the deceased through the Duat and into the afterlife. These texts were written on papyrus scrolls and placed in tombs, evolving over nearly 2,000 years from around 1550 BCE to 50 BCE. Though the traditions they preserve are certainly older, the journey begins at death. The deceased's bay, one component of the soul, often depicted as a bird with a human head, must travel through the Duat to reach the Hall of Two Truths, where judgment occurs. The Duat is not empty darkness like the Mesopotamian Kur. It is a realm filled with lakes of fire, rivers to cross, gates guarded by demons with knives, serpents that must be defeated or appeased, and challenges that require the correct magical knowledge to overcome. This is why the Book of the Dead contains so many spells. Each spell addresses a specific obstacle. Spell 125, the most famous, provides the negative confession, a list of sins the deceased must deny committing before the gods. Spell 6 prevents the deceased from being forced to do manual labor in the afterlife. Spell 30b prevents the deceased's heart from testifying against them during judgment. The Egyptians believed that with the right knowledge, the right spells spoken at the right moments, even an imperfect person could navigate the Duat successfully. The climax of the journey is the weighing of the heart. In the Hall of Two Truths, presided over by Osiris, god of the dead, the deceased's heart is placed on a scale. On the other side sits a feather, the feather of Ma'at, representing truth, justice, and cosmic order. 42 judges, one for each known administrative district of Egypt, observe. Thoth, god of wisdom and writing, records the result. If the heart and feather balance, if the deceased lived according to Ma'at, the soul is declared true of voice and granted access to the field of reeds, a paradise resembling idealized Egypt, where the blessed dead live eternally in prosperity, working fertile land, celebrating festivals, reuniting with loved ones. If the heart is heavier than the feather, if it is weighted down with sin and falsehood, it tips the scale. And then comes Ammit. Ammit the Devourer is one of the most terrifying figures in Egyptian mythology. She is depicted as a chimera, the head of a crocodile, the forequarters of a leopard or lion, the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. 3 of the most dangerous animals in Egypt combined into one demon. She sits beside the scales waiting. If the heart is heavy, Ammit devours it. And this is true death. Not the death of the body that has already occurred, but the death of the soul. The person ceases to exist. They do not go to a place of suffering. They are simply annihilated, unmaimed, erased from existence. This is crucial. The Egyptian hell is not a place of eternal torture. It is non-existence. The worst punishment imaginable to Egyptians, who went to extraordinary lengths to preserve bodies and names, was to be forgotten, to cease to be. Ammit represents that ultimate negation. However, the Duat itself, the underworld journey, contains suffering for those who fail its tests without reaching judgment. Various spells describe punishments for the wicked encountered in the Duat. The Book of Gates, another funerary text from the New Kingdom period, 1550 to 1077 BCE, describes 12 gates the sun god Ra passes through during his nightly journey through the Duat. In these regions, the blessed dead bask in Ra's light, but the damned burn. They are tied up, decapitated, their bodies thrown into pits of fire. The Book of Caverns, also from the New Kingdom, describes caverns in the Duat, where the enemies of Ra are imprisoned and tortured. One scene shows bound prisoners being burned. Another shows their souls, represented as bar birds, being annihilated. These texts suggest that while the virtuous dead proceed to judgment and possibly the field of reeds, the wicked suffer in the Duat itself, punished by demons under Ra's authority. One of the most detailed depictions comes from the tomb of Seti, Pharaoh, who ruled approximately 1294 to 1279 BCE. The walls show the Duat's geography in intricate detail. There are lakes of fire described as the place of destruction. There are pits where the damned are held upside down. There are serpents guarding gates, and demons with knives waiting to dismember souls who lack the correct spells for safe passage. But even these punishments were not necessarily eternal. Some texts suggest that after a period of suffering, the wicked might be annihilated, the ultimate punishment, rather than tortured forever. The Egyptian mind seemed unable to conceive of eternal conscious torment. Either you passed to paradise, or you suffered in the duats and were eventually destroyed, or Amit devoured you immediately. The concept of judgment based on earthly behavior was revolutionary. Mesopotamia had hints of divine judgment, but Egypt made it central. Your fate depended not on proper burial alone, not on offerings from the living, but on how you had lived. The negative confession in Spell 125 lists 42 declarations the deceased must make. I have not committed sin. I have not committed robbery with violence. I have not stolen. I have not slain men or women. I have not made anyone suffer. I have not damaged the offerings in the temples. I have not added to the weight of the balance. I have not taken milk from the mouths of children. The list continues, covering ethics both ritual, temple offerings, and moral treatment of others. This is moral accountability in the afterlife. The idea that how you behave toward other humans matters to the gods and determines your eternal fate. This Egyptian development, judgment, the weighing of deeds, punishment or reward based on earthly behavior would influence Judaism, Christianity, and Islam profoundly. When these religions developed their concepts of afterlife judgment, they were building on foundations laid by Egypt millennia earlier. The Egyptians also contributed the geography of hell. Not a simple dark house, but a complex realm with regions, gates, guardians, obstacles. A journey, not a static destination. This idea that reaching the afterlife requires passage through dangerous territory appears in Greek mythology, in Christian visions of purgatory, in Islamic descriptions of the path to paradise or hell. Egypt invented the underworld as a structured, navigable, if dangerous, place. By the time Egypt fell to Rome in 30 BCE, its religious influence had already spread throughout the Mediterranean. Greek and Roman philosophers studied Egyptian beliefs. Early Christians in Egypt absorbed concepts from the ancient religions surrounding them. The weighing of souls, judgment by divine authority, lakes of fire, demons with specific roles. These Egyptian innovations became part of the vocabulary of hell that would dominate human imagination for the next 2,000 years. Chapter 3. The classical underworld, Greece and Rome. When the Greeks began writing about the afterlife in the 8th century BCE, they created something different from both Mesopotamia and Egypt. The Greek underworld, Hades, named after the god who ruled it, was a complex realm with different regions for different types of dead. Not everyone suffered equally. Not everyone was judged. The Greeks introduced nuance, levels, a spectrum of afterlife experience based on who you were and how you died. Our earliest detailed source is Homer's Odyssey, composed approximately 800 to 700 BCE. In Book 11, Odysseus travels to the entrance of the underworld to consult the prophet Tiresias. What he describes is bleak. The dead are strengthless shades, mere shadows of their living selves. They must drink blood to gain enough strength to speak. They remember their lives, but cannot truly participate in existence. Achilles, the greatest Greek hero, tells Odysseus, "I would rather be a hired servant in the house of a landless man than king of all these dead." This Homeric underworld resembles the Mesopotamian Ker, a place of diminished existence, joyless and shadowy. But Homer introduces divisions. The wicked suffer specific punishments. Tantalus stands in a pool of water beneath fruit trees, but when he reaches for fruit, it withdraws. When he bends to drink, the water recedes. He is eternally hungry and thirsty, punished for serving his son as food to the gods. Sisyphus pushes a boulder up a hill, only to have it roll down just before reaching the top, forcing him to begin again eternally, punished for his deceitfulness and arrogance toward the gods. These are the first, clearly articulated punishments that fit the crime. Tantalus, who violated hospitality and deceived gods with a terrible meal, suffers eternal hunger. Sisyphus, who believed himself clever enough to cheat death, performs pointless labor forever. This concept, that afterlife punishment reflects earthly sin, would become fundamental to later hell traditions. By the time we reach Plato in the 4th century BCE, Greek understanding of the afterlife had evolved significantly. In the Republic, written around 380 BCE, Plato describes the myth of a soldier who died in battle, returns to life and describes what he witnessed in the afterlife. Souls are judged. The just ascend to heaven for 1,000-year reward. The unjust descend beneath the earth for 1,000-year punishment. Then both groups are reincarnated. The most wicked, tyrants, murderers, those who committed sacrilege, are cast into Tartarus, a prison far below Hades, where they suffer torments forever. Tartarus becomes crucial in Greek hell tradition. It existed in mythology before Plato, but he systematizes it. Tartarus is not merely the underworld, it is the underworld's prison, as far below Hades as heaven is above earth. Here the Titans were imprisoned after their war with the Olympian gods. Here the truly wicked suffer. Virgil's Aeneid, written around 20 BCE, provides the most detailed tour of the classical underworld. In Book 6, the hero Aeneas descends to the underworld with the Sibyl as his guide. This text would directly inspire Dante's Inferno 13 centuries later, but Virgil's vision is distinctly Roman, synthesizing Greek tradition with Roman values. Virgil describes the geography precisely. The underworld is reached by crossing the river Acheron on Charon's ferry, but only if you've been properly buried and can pay Charon's fee, a coin placed in the corpse's mouth. The dog Cerberus guards the entrance, preventing the living from entering and the dead from leaving. Beyond the entrance are different regions. The fields of mourning hold those who died of unrequited love. The fields of war hold soldiers, unbaptized infants. This is Virgil writing in an era when Christianity was emerging, dwell in limbo, not suffering, but not in paradise. Then come the two extreme destinations. The Elysian Fields, also called the Isles of the Blessed, are paradise for heroes and the virtuous. Here, life is perfect, with eternal spring, games, music, no suffering or want. But on the other path, past the three-headed dog, down into darkness, is Tartarus. Virgil describes its walls, triple-walled, surrounded by a river of fire, the Phlegethon. Inside, he hears groaning, the crack of whips, the dragging of chains. The Sibyl describes the tortures within. Tityos, whose liver is eternally eaten by vultures because he assaulted the goddess Leto. Ixion, bound to an eternally spinning wheel of fire for attempting to seduce Hera. The Danaides, sisters who murdered their husbands and are condemned to fill a jar with water using leaky sieves forever. Rhadamanthus judges the dead in Tartarus, interrogating them and assigning punishments. The worst sinners suffer the worst torments. This is proportional justice in the afterlife. Not everyone goes to the same hell. Your punishment matches your crime. The Romans adopted Greek underworld traditions wholesale, but added their own emphasis. Roman poets and philosophers stressed that earthly behavior determines afterlife fate. Cicero, writing in the 1st century BCE, argued in The Republic and on the nature of the gods that belief in afterlife punishment encourages moral behavior. Whether or not gods exist, he suggested, believing they watch and will judge is socially useful. This cynical pragmatism about hell as social control would echo through history. By the time Christianity emerged in the 1st century CE, the classical underworld was thoroughly developed. A complex geography with rivers, gates, and guards, different regions for different types of dead, judgment determining fate, eternal reward for the virtuous in Elysium, eternal punishment for the wicked in Tartarus, and specific torments matching specific sins. All of this existed before the New Testament was written. All of this would influence Christian concepts of hell profoundly. One final Greek contribution, the idea that hell could be escaped through knowledge or heroism. Orpheus descended to retrieve his wife Eurydice. Heracles descended as one of his labors and returned. Odysseus visited the entrance. Aeneas made the journey. In Greek tradition, the underworld was terrifying, but not absolutely sealed. With the right guide, the right protection, the right knowledge, even the living could descend and return. This notion that hell can be navigated, that it has a geography knowable to mortals, persists in later traditions from Dante to modern fiction. The Greeks and Romans gave us hell as a structured, governed, knowable place. Not chaos, but order. Not random, but just. A place where earthly actions receive appropriate eternal consequences, where the dead exist in a complex society beneath the earth, where heroic individuals might venture and return with knowledge. This vision would shape Western imagination for 2 millennia. Chapter 4: Jewish Sheol and the Emergence of Gehenna. To understand Christian hell, we must first understand that ancient Judaism had very little concept of afterlife at all, and what concept existed was nothing like the fire and brimstone inferno Christianity would develop. The Hebrew Bible, what Christians call the Old Testament, mentions an afterlife realm called Sheol. But Sheol is not hell. It is closer to the Mesopotamian Kur, or Greek Hades, a shadowy place where all the dead go, regardless of virtue. There is no judgment, no punishment, no reward, just vague, continued existence in darkness beneath the earth. The word Sheol appears 66 times in the Hebrew Bible. Ecclesiastes 9:10 describes it. For in Sheol, where you are going, there is no working or planning or knowledge or wisdom. Psalm 88, 10-12 asks, do you work wonders for the dead? Do the departed spirits rise up to praise you? Is your steadfast love declared in the grave, your faithfulness in destruction? Are your wonders known in the darkness? The answer implied is no. Sheol is separation from God. It is not punishment. It is simply the absence of life and divine presence. Both righteous and wicked go there. King David and wicked Korah are both described as descending to Sheol. This is crucial. Ancient Judaism did not have a developed concept of hell as punishment. The focus was on earthly reward and punishment. Follow God's law and prosper in this life. disobey, and suffer in this life. What happens after death was murky, unimportant, barely discussed. This changes during the period of the Second Temple, roughly 500 BCE to 70 CE. During this era, Judaism encountered Persian Zoroastrianism, Greek philosophy, and experienced massive political upheaval. These forces transformed Jewish afterlife beliefs. Zoroastrianism, the Persian religion, had a clear heaven and hell. The righteous crossed the Chinvat bridge to paradise. The wicked fell from the bridge into a pit of torment. After the Babylonian exile, 586 to 538 BCE, when Jews lived under Persian rule, these concepts filtered into Jewish thought. By the time we reach the Book of Daniel, written around 167 to 164 BCE, we find this: "Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt." Daniel 12:2. This is the first clear biblical reference to different eternal fates: resurrection to life or resurrection to punishment. The concept of Gehenna emerges in this period. Gehenna, Greek transliteration of Hebrew Gehinnom, referred to a real place, the Valley of Hinnom, south of Jerusalem. In earlier periods, this valley had been a site where some Israelites practiced child sacrifice to foreign gods, an abomination explicitly condemned. Kings Ahaz and Manasseh were said to have sacrificed their sons there. 2 Chronicles 28:3, 33:6. King Josiah defiled the site to prevent further sacrifices. 2 Kings 23:10. By the Second Temple period, Gehenna had become a metaphor for divine punishment. The valley was reportedly used as a garbage dump where fires burned continuously, consuming refuse and bodies of criminals. Whether this is historically accurate or later legend is debated, but the imagery, continuous fire, smoke, destruction, became associated with the name Gehenna. Intertestamental Jewish texts, written between the Old and New Testaments, develop these ideas. The Book of Enoch, probably compiled between 300 to 100 BCE, contains elaborate descriptions of the afterlife. Enoch is taken on a tour of heaven and hell. He sees mountains of fire where fallen angels are imprisoned. He sees places of punishment for human sinners, valleys of fire, places of darkness, prisons where the wicked await final judgment. What's significant is that these are holding places. Final judgment has not yet occurred. At the end of time, there will be resurrection and judgment. Then the righteous receive eternal life, and the wicked receive final punishment, usually described as annihilation or eternal fire. The concept of annihilation is important. Many Jewish texts from this period suggest that the wicked are destroyed, not tortured forever. They burn in fire and cease to exist. This aligns with earlier Hebrew thought about Sheol being negation of existence. By the 1st century CE, when Jesus was teaching and the New Testament was being written, Judaism had multiple competing views of the afterlife. Traditional view, Sheol, where all the dead go, shadowy and neutral. Greek-influenced view, immortal souls that are judged, with the righteous going to paradise and the wicked to punishment. Pharisaic view, bodily resurrection at the end of time, followed by judgment and eternal life or destruction. Sadducee view, no afterlife at all. When you die, you're done. Essene view, as at Qumran, the righteous join the angels, the wicked are destroyed. Jesus used Gehenna as a warning. In the Gospels, he mentions it 12 times. Do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. rather fear him, who can destroy both soul and body in Gehenna. Matthew 10:28. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life crippled than with two hands to go to Gehenna, to the unquenchable fire. Mark 9:43. These sayings use Gehenna as the ultimate threat, total destruction, not necessarily eternal conscious torment. The unquenchable fire may refer to fire that cannot be put out while burning, not fire that burns forever without consuming. The parable of the rich man and Lazarus, Luke 16:19-31, shows a different image. The rich man dies and is in Hades, being in torment. He sees Lazarus in Abraham's bosom, paradise. He begs for water, but is told a great chasm separates them. This suggests conscious suffering after death, not just waiting for judgment. The Book of Revelation, written around 95 CE, introduces the lake of fire. This is where death and Hades themselves are thrown, Revelation 20:14, along with anyone whose name is not in the Book of Life. The devil, the beast, and the false prophet are tormented day and night forever and ever, Revelation 20:10. This apocalyptic imagery, eternal torment in fire, would become central to Christian hell. But it's important to note that in Judaism itself, these ideas remained contested. Rabbinic Judaism, developing after the temple's destruction in 70 CE, continued to debate the nature of afterlife punishment. The Talmud mentions Gehenna as a place of punishment, but some texts suggest it lasts 12 months, after which the wicked are either annihilated or purified and admitted to the world to come. So Judaism's contribution to hell is complex. The name Gehenna, imagery of fire and smoke, the concept of judgment followed by different eternal fates, but often emphasizing destruction rather than eternal torture. Christianity would take these raw materials and construct something far more elaborate and terrifying. Chapter 5. Christian hell crystallizes. The New Testament provides fragments, images, warnings about hell, but it does not provide a systematic theology. That would come later, developed by early Christian theologians called the Church Fathers, who spent centuries debating, refining, and ultimately establishing what Christians would believe about eternal punishment. The earliest Christian writings after the New Testament show diverse views. The Didache, a Christian manual written around 100 CE, barely mentions the afterlife. The Shepherd of Hermas, written around 140 to 150 CE, suggests that some sinners might be purified rather than eternally damned. These early texts focus on repentance and living righteously, not on detailed hell geography. But as Christianity spread and encountered Greek philosophy, the need for systematic theology grew. How exactly does hell work? Who goes there? For how long? What happens to them? These questions demanded answers. Justin Martyr, writing around 150 to 160 CE, was one of the first to articulate a clear doctrine. In his first apology, he states that the souls of the wicked are punished after death in eternal fire. Not annihilated, punished consciously, forever. This was a significant development. Justin, trained in Greek philosophy, applied Greek concepts of the immortal soul to Christian teaching. If the soul is immortal and some souls are wicked, they must suffer eternally. Tertullian, writing around 200 CE in North Africa, went further. In On the Spectacles, he describes the joy Christians will feel in heaven watching the damned suffer in hell. He writes, "How shall I admire, how laugh, how how rejoice, how exult, when I behold so many proud monarchs groaning in the lowest abyss of darkness, so many magistrates liquefying in fiercer flames than they ever kindled against the Christians. This is shocking to modern readers. But Tertullian was making a theological point. God's justice must be visible and satisfying. The wicked must receive proportionate punishment. Watching that punishment is not cruelty. It is witnessing divine justice fulfilled. Origen of Alexandria, writing 220 to 250 CE, offered a radically different view. In On First Principles, he suggested apokatastasis, universal restoration. Eventually, after however long their punishment requires, all souls, even Satan himself, will be purified and reconciled to God. Hell is corrective, not retributive. It is purgation through fire, not eternal torture. Origen's view was controversial. Many church leaders rejected it as undermining the gravity of sin and the necessity of urgent repentance. If everyone eventually gets to heaven regardless, why bother being good? But Origen's ideas influenced many, and for centuries, universal salvation remained a debated position within Christianity. Augustine of Hippo, writing 400 to 430 CE, essentially settled the debate for Western Christianity. In The City of God, Augustine argues that hell is eternal conscious torment with no hope of escape or annihilation. The damned suffer proportionate to their sins. There are degrees of torment, but all suffer forever. This is just because sin against an infinite God deserves infinite punishment. The damned, in their pride, would continue sinning even in hell if able, so their punishment must continue eternally. Augustine also addresses a question that had troubled many. How can the blessed in heaven be happy, knowing their loved ones suffer in hell? His answer: the blessed will have perfect understanding of divine justice. They will agree with God's decision and will not feel pity for those who rejected salvation. Their happiness will not be diminished by the sufferings of the damned, because they will recognize that justice is being served. This seems harsh to modern sensibilities. But Augustine was working within a logical framework. If God is perfectly just, his decisions must be correct. If souls in heaven retain earthly emotional attachments that conflict with God's justice, heaven would not be perfect bliss. Therefore, in perfection, the blessed must lose those conflicting emotions. By the 5th century, Christian hell had taken definable shape in Western theology. Location, beneath the earth, separated from heaven by an unbridgeable gulf. Nature, eternal fire that torments souls without consuming them. Inhabitants, Satan and his demons. Human souls who died in mortal sin without repentance. Possibly unbaptized infants, though this was debated. Purpose, punishment for sin, demonstration of divine justice. Duration, eternal, with no possibility of escape, purification, or annihilation. Degrees, different levels of suffering based on the severity of earthly sins. Effect on the blessed. The saved in heaven understand and approve of hell's necessity, experiencing no diminishment of joy. Eastern Christianity developed somewhat differently. Greek-speaking theologians often emphasize theosis, union with God, as the goal of existence. Hell, in much Eastern thought, is not a place God created to punish, but the natural state of a soul that has rejected union with God. It is self-imposed separation, not externally imposed torture. God's love radiates to all, but those who have hardened themselves against it experience that love as burning, while those who have opened themselves to it experience it as light and joy. Gregory of Nyssa, writing in the late 4th century, sided with Origen's view of eventual universal restoration, though he was more cautious in expressing it. He suggested that hell's fire is purifying, and that after sufficient time, even the most wicked souls would be cleansed and reconciled. But Augustine's view triumphed in the West, codified by councils and popes. By 500 CE, Christian hell was firmly established, eternal, fiery, inescapable, inhabited by demons and the damned, and absolutely necessary for divine justice. One theological innovation deserves special attention: the harrowing of hell. This doctrine, based on 1 Peter 3:18-20 and 4:6, claims that between his crucifixion and resurrection, Christ descended into hell, or Hades, or Sheol, terminology varying. There he preached to the spirits of the dead, and according to some versions, liberated the righteous who had died before his coming: Abraham, Moses, David, and others, bringing them to heaven. The harrowing appears in the Apostles' Creed. He descended into hell. Eastern icons depict Christ breaking down hell's gates, trampling them beneath his feet, pulling Adam and Eve from their tombs. This doctrine served multiple theological purposes. It explained where Old Testament righteous went before Christ's resurrection. It demonstrated Christ's victory over death and hell. It showed that salvation reached even beyond the grave. But the harrowing was a one-time event. After Christ's ascension, hell's gates were sealed. No further liberations. The doctrine provided narrative satisfaction. The great heroes of Jewish tradition were saved, without undermining hell's eternal nature for post-Christian sinners. By the time the Roman Empire officially Christianized in the 4th century, hell was not just theology, it was social policy. The threat of eternal damnation encouraged conversion. It justified persecution of heretics. Better to coerce someone into the true faith and save their soul than allow them to remain in error and burn forever. It provided ultimate sanction for moral behavior. Earthly punishment is temporary, but hell is eternal. The early church also developed purgatory, though that doctrine would not be fully articulated until medieval times. The concept: most Christians die with some unforgiven sins or unpaid penance. They are destined for heaven, but not yet worthy. Purgatory is a temporary place of purification through fire. It hurts, but it ends. It cleanses. Then the soul proceeds to heaven. This was a pastoral innovation, offering hope to ordinary Christians who feared they were not holy enough for direct entrance to paradise, but did not deserve damnation. Purgatory is not in Scripture. It developed from early Christian practices of praying for the dead, the assumption being that such prayers could help those in intermediate states. 2 Maccabees 12:46 in the Catholic and Orthodox Old Testament mentions prayers for the dead, suggesting belief that such prayers were efficacious. From this practice grew theology. If prayers help the dead, they must be in a state where help is possible. Not heaven, no need for help, and not hell, beyond hell. Therefore, an intermediate state must exist. By 500 CE, Christian afterlife geography had 3 tiers: heaven for the saved, purgatory for the saved but not yet purified, and hell for the irredeemably damned. This structure would dominate Western imagination for the next 1,000 years. Chapter 6: Islamic Jahannam, the 7 levels. When Islam emerged in the 7th century CE in Arabia, it inherited influences from Judaism, Christianity, and Zoroastrianism, synthesizing them into a distinctive vision of the afterlife. Islamic hell, Jahannam, shares features with Jewish Gehenna and Christian Inferno, but has unique characteristics that reflect Islamic theology. The Quran, Islam's holy text revealed to the Prophet Muhammad between 610 to 632 CE, mentions Jahannam repeatedly. Unlike the Bible, which provides fragmentary hell references, the Quran describes the afterlife systematically. Judgment, paradise, and hell are central themes, mentioned in nearly every chapter. After death, souls remain in the grave in a state called barzakh, a barrier or waiting period until the day of resurrection. On that day, all the dead will be raised and judged by Allah. Each person's deeds will be weighed on a scale. Those whose good deeds outweigh bad will cross the Sirat, a bridge narrow as a hair and sharp as a sword, stretched over Jahannam. The righteous will cross safely to paradise, Jannah. The wicked will fall into the fire below. Jahannam is described in vivid, terrifying detail. The Quran emphasizes physical torment. It is a place of scorching fire. Quran 88:4, where the damned will be given boiling water to drink, 56:54, and garments of fire, 22:19. Their skins will be burned off, then replaced so they can feel pain again. Those who reject our signs, we shall soon cast them into the fire. As often as their skins are roasted through, we shall change them for fresh skins, that they may taste the penalty. 4:56. The damned will eat from the tree of Zaqqum, which has bitter fruit like molten brass. It will boil in their insides, like the boiling of scalding water. 44, 43 to 46. They will cry for death, but death will not come. They will beg for relief, but relief will be denied. And they will cry, O Malik, the guardian of hell, would that your Lord put an end to us. He will say, nay, but you shall abide forever. 43:77. Jahannam has 7 levels, each for different categories of sinners. The levels are 1. Jahannam proper, for sinful Muslims who will eventually be released after purification. 2. Laza, for Christians described in the Quran as raging fire. 70:15. 3. Hutama, for Jews called the crushing one. 104:4-5. 4. Sa'ir, for Sabians and Zoroastrians, a blazing fire. 4:10. 5. Sakar, for those who neglected prayer, described as scorching. 74:42. 6. Jahim, for polytheists and idolaters, a fierce, blazing fire. 100:6-7. 7. Hawaya, the deepest level for hypocrites who pretended faith while concealing disbelief, described as a bottomless pit or abyss. 101:9-11. These levels are hierarchical. The worst sinners, hypocrites who knew truth and rejected it, suffer the most. Polytheists, who never recognized God's unity, suffer severely. Monotheists, who erred in understanding God, Christians and Jews, from the Islamic perspective, suffer but less than polytheists. Sinful Muslims suffer the least and may eventually be released. This introduces a crucial Islamic concept. Hell is not necessarily eternal for everyone. Polytheists and unbelievers who died rejecting God remain in Jahannam forever. But Muslims who sinned but retained faith might be punished for a period, then released to paradise. Their punishment is corrective, not purely retributive. The Hadith, collections of Muhammad's sayings compiled in the centuries after his death, adds elaborate detail. One famous Hadith describes the size of Jahannam. The fire will not be full until Allah puts his foot on it, and it will say, enough, enough, enough. Sahih Bukhari. This metaphorical language suggests hell's vastness and insatiability. Angels called Sabaniya, 19 in number, guard Jahannam and torture the damned. The Quran describes them as stern and severe, who do not disobey Allah in what He commands them, but do what they are commanded. 66:6. They are not fallen angels. In Islam, angels cannot fall. They are created specifically to administer punishment, and they do so without mercy or hesitation because that is their purpose. The physical descriptions in the Quran are intense. The damned wear chains 70 cubits long, 96:30. They lie on beds of fire with fire covering them, 7:41. These are not metaphors in traditional Islamic interpretation. They are literal descriptions of what awaits those who reject Allah and die unrepentant. Islamic theology emphasizes that Jahannam is not unjust. Every soul condemned to it deserves its fate because they had knowledge of truth and rejected it, or they committed evil without repentance. Allah is described as the most merciful of those who show mercy, but also as severe in punishment. Justice requires that wickedness be punished. Mercy is available through repentance in life, but after death, judgment is final. One hadith describes intercession. On the day of judgment, the Prophet Muhammad will intercede for sinners, asking Allah to show mercy. Some Muslims who deserve hellfire will be spared through this intercession. Others who have already entered will be released, but this mercy applies only to Muslims who, despite their sins, maintained belief in Allah's unity and Muhammad's prophethood. Unbelievers receive no intercession. The Quran repeatedly emphasizes that the afterlife is the true life, and this life of the world is only an amusement and a play. Verily, the home of the hereafter, that is the life indeed. 29:64. Earthly life is a test. The afterlife is reality. This urgency that your eternal fate depends on earthly choices during a brief life is meant to motivate constant awareness of God and moral behavior. Islamic scholars debated some details. The Mu'tazilite school, emphasizing divine justice, argued that Allah must reward good and punish evil, and hell's eternity demonstrates that justice. The Asharite school, emphasizing divine omnipotence, argued that Allah could forgive whom He wills, even without repentance, because He is absolutely sovereign. But both schools agreed that the Quran's descriptions of Jahannam are real, and that most of humanity will go there because most reject true faith. One striking difference from Christianity: Islam does not have purgatory. The barzakh is a waiting state, not a place of purification. Either you go to paradise or you go to hell. The only middle ground is for sinful Muslims who enter hell for a time, are purified through suffering, and then proceed to paradise. But this is not a separate place. It is hell itself, functioning as purgation for believers. Another difference: predestination. Islam teaches that Allah has written all destinies. He knows who will believe and who will disbelieve, who will go to paradise and who to hell. This raises theological problems. If Allah predestines some to hell, how is that just? Islamic theology responds that humans have moral agency in the moment of choice, even though Allah knows what they will choose. His knowledge does not cause their choice. They freely choose, and He judges accordingly. This paradox, divine foreknowledge and human free will, is acknowledged, but not fully resolved, similar to Christian debates on predestination. By the time Islamic civilization flourished in the 8th through 13th centuries, Jahannam was established in Islamic thought. 7 levels of varying intensity, eternal for unbelievers but possibly temporary for sinful Muslims, administered by merciless angels, described in vivid physical torments. balanced by the possibility of intercession for believers. This vision of hell served similar functions as in Christianity, motivating moral behavior, warning against sin, promising justice, and explaining why converting to the true faith is urgent. Chapter 7: Buddhist and Hindu Naraka, Eastern Hells. While Abrahamic religions developed concepts of eternal hell for unbelievers, South and East Asian religions created something different: temporary hells within cycles of reincarnation. Suffering is intense but not endless. Punishment is corrective, preparing the soul for rebirth. In Hinduism, Naraka is described in various texts. The oldest references appear in the Rig Veda, composed approximately 1500 to 1200 BCE, but detailed descriptions come much later, particularly in the Puranas, written between 300 to 1500 CE. The Garuda Purana, probably composed around 900 CE, describes 28 major narakas, each specializing in punishing particular sins. These are not permanent residences. Souls go to Naraka after death, suffer in proportion to their earthly karma, the moral law of cause and effect, and then are reborn. Some of the Narakas described in the Garuda Purana: Tamisra, darkness. For those who robbed others or committed adultery, the soul is bound and beaten by Yama's servants until unconscious, then revived and beaten again. Raurava, fearful. For those who cause suffering, the soul is tormented by Ruru serpents. Mahajwala, great fire. For those who stole, the soul burns in fire. Krimibojana, worm food. For those who didn't honor guests or ate before feeding others, the soul is devoured by worms while unable to die. Kumbhipaka, cooked in a pot. For those who cooked living beings, the soul is boiled in oil. Asipatravana, forest of sword leaves. For those who deviated from righteous path, the soul walks through a forest where leaves are sharp blades that cut flesh. The descriptions are graphic, but the key difference from Abrahamic hell is temporariness. After suffering exhausts the negative karma, the soul is released and reborn. Rebirth might be as a human again, or as an animal, insect, or plant, depending on remaining karma. Eventually, through cycles of birth, death, and rebirth, the soul can achieve moksha, liberation from the cycle entirely, union with the divine, ending all suffering. Naraka is administered by Yama, the god of death, assisted by Chitragupta, who keeps records of all deeds. When a soul arrives, Chitragupta reads the life record. Yama assigns the appropriate Naraka and duration. This is not arbitrary judgment, it is precise accounting. Every action has consequences. The punishment fits the crime exactly. Buddhism, which emerged in India around the 5th century BCE, adopted and adapted Hindu Naraka concepts. Buddhist texts describe multiple hell realms, usually 8 hot hells and 8 cold hells, plus numerous peripheral hells. The Devaduta Sutta, part of the Pali Canon, compiled in the 1st century BCE, describes King Yama, same name as Hindu Yama, but here a judge, not himself a god, interrogating the newly dead. He asks, "Did you not see the 5 messengers sent by heaven to warn you?" The messengers are an infant, birth brings suffering; an aged person, aging brings suffering; a sick person, illness brings suffering; a criminal being punished, actions have consequences; and a corpse, death comes to all. The sinner admits seeing these warnings, but ignored them. Yama then assigns punishment appropriate to the sins committed. The Buddhist hell realms include the hell of living beings, where the damned are attacked by guardians and each other, hacking at each other with weapons only to revive and endure it again. The Black Line, hell, where lines are drawn on the damned's body. Then they are sawed or cut along those lines. The crushing hell, where the damned are crushed between mountains. The howling hell, where the damned burn in fire and scream. The great howling hell, like the howling hell, but more intense. The hot hell, where the damned are roasted in iron buildings. The very hot hell, like the hot hell but worse. The Avicii hell, the worst of the hot hells, reserved for the most serious sins like killing parents, killing an enlightened being, or causing schism in the Buddhist community. Here the damned burn continuously without relief. But even Avicii is not eternal. Buddhist texts calculate lifespans in hell realms, though the numbers are astronomically long, equivalent to many human lifetimes. One day in Avicii equals trillions of years. But eventually, the karma is exhausted, and the soul is released for rebirth. The cold hells mirror the hot hells. Arbuda blisters from cold. Near Arbuda, blisters burst. Atata, shivering. Hahava, lamentations. Huhuva, chattering teeth from cold. Utpala, skin turns blue. Padma, skin cracks into pieces. And Mahapadma, skin cracks worse and body breaks apart. Again, these are temporary, lasting however long it takes to exhaust the negative karma that sent the soul there. Japanese Buddhism developed particularly elaborate hell imagery. The Jigoku Zoshi, hell scrolls, painted in the 12th century CE, depict various Buddhist hells in gruesome detail. Demons with animal heads torturing naked humans, people being sawed, crushed, boiled, frozen, and dismembered. These scrolls were used to teach Buddhist ethics, showing the consequences of breaking precepts. Chinese Buddhism similarly developed vivid hell imagery, influenced by indigenous Chinese beliefs about the afterlife. The Diyu, earth prison, in Chinese tradition has multiple levels, often described as 18 levels corresponding to different sins. Souls are judged by Yama, Yanluo Wang in Chinese, and his assistants. The punishments are precisely tailored. Liars have their tongues ripped out, thieves have their hands cut off, murderers are thrown in a cauldron of boiling oil. But again, these punishments are temporary. Chinese folk religion added the concept that living descendants could help souls in Diyu by performing rituals, offering prayers, and burning joss paper money. This offered comfort to the living and reinforced filial piety. Children must care for parents even after death. The crucial philosophical difference between Eastern and Western hells is purpose. In Abrahamic religions, hell is retributive justice, punishment for the sake of justice. In Hindu and Buddhist thought, Naraka is corrective, suffering that burns away negative karma, preparing